Chapter 9-10. As soon as Duque said that, Tyrant and Malfurion felt a chill down their spines. They had been fooled by their own fixed thinking. That's right. For tens of thousands of years, if one wanted to go to Mount Hyjal from Azhara, they had to take a big detour. They had to go to Grey Valley in the west, then to Fellwood Forest in the northwest, and finally to the west of Mount Hyjal. They had to go up the mountain from the lowest mountain on the west side. But they had forgotten that as long as they did not enter Mount Hyjal, the Burning Legion's movements were not restricted. Therefore, there was a possibility that the three parties had set up a large number of troops in Grey Valley, but the demons did not even care about these intercepting troops. They directly ran to the mountains north of Grey Valley and followed the mountains to the higher foot of Mount Hyjal. Tyrant pursed her lips. Duque said, "So, I suggest that the Alliance defend Azhara's landing point, and then defend the second battle at the foot of Mount Hyjal or in the open space halfway up the mountain. Also, the Alliance welcomes the Night Elves and the Horde to send military observers to our two lines of defense." No one knew what military observers were, but they could understand from the name. Duque was actually so generous as to let both sides send people to supervise the army? No, this was not even supervising the army. This was completely showing the military essence of the Alliance to a temporary ally. Queen Sylvanas couldn't sit still anymore, and the whisper of the wind drifted into Duque's ears. "Duque, is this really okay? Forget about the Night Elves, about the Horde." Duque smiled. "You don't know what kind of person the current chief of the Horde and Thrall are. Leave everything to me." Queen Sylvanas chose to believe in Duque. Looking one step forward and thinking 3 steps ahead was the most basic quality of a leader. What Duque had to do was think 3 steps ahead. This temporary alliance was terrible. If the world wasn't about to be destroyed, there would be no basis for an alliance at all. Everyone knew that Taurens and Orcs were the best meat shields, the High Elves were the strongest mages, the Night Elves were the best archers, the Human Knights were the flank charges, the Dwarves played with guns and tanks, and the Gnomes played with cannons. But how great it was to combine the strengths of each race. Why was it that in history, the 3 major factions had to each have their own camp and resist step by step? It was all because of that pile of bad debts. The Horde had just gotten rid of the Night Elf demigod Cenarius, and the Dark Elves had been enemies with the Alliance for more than 10 years. During the first and second battle of the Dark Portal, the Alliance had massacred the Alliance's cities, and then the Alliance had enslaved the Beastmen. From the perspective of their own race, it was hard to say who was in the right and who was in the wrong. The Alliance and the Night Elves weren't any better. Queen Sylvie sat next to Duque, almost dazzling Tyrant and Malfurion's eyes. The High Elves were exiled by the Nature Elves. Who would have thought that they would have to kneel on their knees and beg the prodigal son they had chased out of the family to come back and save them? If the person sitting next to Duque was a magic elven, such as Kale, then it would definitely be more eye-catching. Fortunately, Queen Sylvie was a ranger, so the Night Elves felt better. To be honest, they were exiled because they hated the High Elves' abuse of magic. Duque and Jaina were also secretly provoking them. So, Duque was deliberately being so generous. It was also to pave the way for a more sincere cooperation. Here, the Alliance is willing to fight 2 battles. You guys do as you see fit. Seeing Duque like this, Medivh secretly heaved a sigh of relief. The Alliance was most afraid of the other races holding on to their own pockets and refusing to give in no matter what. If this went on, the best result would be to force them into a mess. In fact, they would still be minding their own business and wouldn't be able to fight at all. The Alliance had made a good start, and the rest would be much easier to handle. Medivh was the first to bow to Duque. "Thank you, Duque. Thank you and the Alliance for your contribution to Azeroth." On the other side, Tyrant and Malfurion also stood up and bowed. Thrall had a bitter taste in his mouth. The Beastmen had never been a stingy race. They were straightforward and liked to repay the generosity of others with generosity. But now, the Beastmen couldn't be generous. Thrall had no way of knowing whether his hometown, Draenor, was still there. The Alliance had blocked all news from the Dark Portal. If his hometown was as Orgrim had described, then after his hometown exploded, the Beastmen in Kalimdor would be the last of them. No matter how elite the beastmen were, they were still too small compared to the Alliance's population of nearly 10 million. Moreover, even if they survived this crisis, who could guarantee that the Alliance wouldn't attack again? Although Thrall also understood that under the premise that the world was in danger of being destroyed, any post-war alliance would only be a piece of waste paper, Thrall's heart was still trembling. He had to stop the Burning Legion from destroying the world, but he also had to think of a way to preserve the vitality of his tribe. This was where Thrall was at a loss. Thrall was still too young. His expression was practically written all over his face. Duque couldn't help but laugh in his heart, but he kept a straight face. However, the Alliance won't be able to retreat to Mount Hyjal in time for the first battle in Azeroth. So, I hope that the Alliance's troops will be allowed to retreat if things go south. Tyrande and Thrall thought about it and nodded at the same time. Sure. After all, the Night Elves had repeatedly emphasized that they had a big move, but it needed time. On the other hand, as long as they could buy enough time, no one wanted to lose all their elites to the bottomless pit that was the Burning Legion. So, Duque pointed to a place on the large map in the middle of the conference room. I hope that when the Alliance's first line of defense can't hold on, we can retreat downstream from here. As Duque spoke, he looked at Thrall. I'm sorry, the Alliance's first line of defense is mostly mechanized troops. It will be difficult for them to retreat to Grey Valley, which is full of forests. Thrall was bitter. He instinctively wanted to refuse. Because the place that Duque pointed to was the River of Wrath. The River of Wrath was the dividing line between Azeroth and Grey Valley. The source in the north was near Mount Hyjal, but the downstream area in the south was the Horde's new main city, Orgrimmar. If it wasn't for the fact that the world could be destroyed, would the Alliance's mechanized infantry pass through the main gate of their own main city? Would the Horde be able to sleep? If Thrall was a calculating leader, then he would most likely reject the offer. But who was Thrall? The man destined to become the legendary Great Chief of the Horde. Whether it was in the original history or this life, he would be praised by countless orcs and even the Alliance. Not only was he wise, but he also had a heart that no great chief could reach, a heart of justice. From his mouth full of fangs, Thrall spat out 2 words. Chapter 9:11. Character determined fate, and experience determined height. Growing up in human society at a young age gave Sal a broad vision that many of his predecessors and even several chiefs in the past did not have. This was determined by his upbringing. To Duque's surprise, Sal suppressed the doubts of Dorjan and Kain. He not only agreed to the Alliance's first retreat from the River of Fury, but also generously allowed the Alliance to choose an open space anywhere in the lower reaches of the River of Fury in Duroder. Sal stood up. I can't say that I know the Alliance very well, but I know that human cement is a magical thing. It can build a strong fortress group in a very short time. If the Alliance feels that with more time, they can build a stronger line of defense, then the tribe does not mind defending the first battle at the foot of Mount Hyjal. There was a slight uproar in the hall. To be honest, there was no conclusion as to who would be at the front. Except for a certain transmigrator, no one knew what the composition of the Burning Legion's forces was. It might not be a bad thing to be at the front, because there might be room for retreat. But it might not be a good thing to be at the back, because as the mountain road narrowed, retreat would become more and more difficult. If the Night Elves insisted that they had not settled the matter and asked them to continue to fight, would they continue to fight or not? But it was obvious that a wider position would be more conducive to the Alliance's deployment of cannons. Duque was indeed interested in the line of defense on the mountainside. After all, the current situation was very different from the original history. The original Alliance only had Jaina's Theramore army participating in the Battle of the Seamounts, so the number of troops was naturally pitiful. Now, because Duque had saved half of Lordaeron, almost the entire Alliance was participating in the war. In addition, the Gnome's main city, Gnome Reagan, which should have happened at this time in history, broke out more than a decade earlier. This time, there was no emergency transfer of the Gnome's mechanized troops to save the situation. Therefore, the Alliance's troops were more abundant and larger. The Night Elves would certainly take the position at the top of the mountain, and the remaining two options were the mountainside and the foot of the mountain. But the alliance needed the mountainside, and the tribe's cooperation was needed. Now that Sal took the initiative to propose it, he had really solved a big problem for Duque. After a slight pause, Duque nodded. "Thank you, tribe, for your understanding. In exchange, the alliance will not only provide a large number of excellent holy light weapons to the tribe, but will also provide 500 priests to assist the tribe. Also, provide 2,000 rangers to cover the retreat of the horde." Sal's eyes were half-lidded. Duque was very generous. Although Orgrim had warned Thrall more than once to be careful of Duque, Duque's performance had convinced Thrall. After getting the Night Elves' permission to cut down some of the trees in Fellwood Forest for temporary construction, Sal asked the last question. "All right. As for the Night Elves, the tribe only has one last question." "Go ahead." Tyrande lifted her head slightly. "Whether it's the Alliance or the Horde, we're all prepared to make a huge sacrifice for this battle. I just want to know if the move that the Night Elves prepared is worth it. I don't need a specific strategy or a name. I just want you to look me in the eye and answer my question." Magic and whatnot were too profound for the Beastmen. The orcs, who weren't native to Azeroth, didn't want to know what the Night Elves had done in the past 10,000 years to uphold their oath. They only trusted their own instincts. Tyrande stared at Thrall and replied in an extremely sacred tone, "It's worth it. And when that time comes, even if the Night Elves are completely wiped out, we will definitely fulfill our oath." Thrall let out a long sigh. "I have no more questions." At this moment, he looked at Duque. "What about the Alliance?" Duque sighed softly. "No one knows how strong Archimonde is. But I'm sure that he's at least a demigod. Those who haven't stepped into the realm of heroes can't even hurt a hair on his head. So I suggest that even if the defense line is breached, the Alliance and Horde must find a way to gather at the top of Mount Hyjal." Thrall narrowed his eyes. "Like last time near the Dalajan?" "Yes." Thrall was silent for a moment, then his eyes suddenly widened. "To be honest, our tribe has never forgiven you at all, Duke Marcus." "Oh." Duque was a little lazy. "When has the Alliance ever been willing to sincerely forgive the Beastmen who once massacred cities in the Alliance?" Thrall didn't care about Duque's words at all. He continued, "But for the sake of this world, we choose to believe in the Alliance, even if temporarily. I hope that before we defeat the Burning Legion, we can work together happily." Thrall strode forward and extended his hand to Duque. Typical Alliance etiquette. Duque let out a murky breath. This feeling was very strange. Two races, two great forces. There was a deep hatred between them, but at this time, they could feel each other's sincerity and chose to trust each other completely. Perhaps this was fate, an ill-fated relationship. Duque smiled. "Please be gentle when you shake hands. I'm just a weak mage. If you use too much force, I'll report you for attacking the Alliance's commander." Duque's words made Thrall laugh. He replied in a rough voice, "I'll be careful, like I'm dealing with your human porcelain." This was a moment of great historical significance. Duque and Thrall's handshake symbolized the first temporary reconciliation between the Alliance and the Horde in the world of Azeroth. In the face of a greater crisis, they had abandoned their differences and enmity to work together sincerely for the first time. Tyrande walked up silently and placed her delicate hand on their interlocked fingers. "For the future of Azeroth," the three of them shouted in unison. A huge war machine that spanned across 8 races started to move at this moment. A few hours later, a spectacular scene appeared in Grey Valley. Tens of thousands of Alliance and Horde troops were marching along the same path. They were once mortal enemies, but now, even though they were less than 5 meters away from each other, they were staring at each other, and none of them made a move. There was no ridicule, no mockery, no humiliation, and no killing. Everyone was heading towards the same goal, the same destination. Standing high up on the hill, Sylvanas looked at the long snake of troops in the distance. He couldn't help but feel emotional. "I can't believe they're really going to ally with the Horde. I always find it ironic." Duque turned his head. "Ironic? I advise you to get used to it. In the future, the Alliance and the Horde might fight endlessly, or it might be a united front against a foreign enemy. This is the general trend. Chapter 9:12. Is this the general trend? Queen Sylvanas repeated, deep in thought. The general trend. Since ancient times, how many people had been clear-headed and rational enough to see the general trend? Countless idiots in high positions who thought that the world revolved around them could not see the general trend, causing him, his people, and even his entire race to pay the most terrible price. She knew of Duque's hard work. How many sleepless nights had Duque spent convincing the leaders of the various countries to temporarily set aside their hatred towards the Horde? How many easy gains had Duque given up on to connect the resources of the various factions and make use of the advantages of each faction? Duque used his not-so-broad shoulders to shoulder the future of half of planet Azeroth. Perhaps he had all sorts of bad habits, but as a person and as the leader of an alliance, Duque had done the best he could. Let's go. Since the Night Elves and the Horde have agreed to our request, we don't need to make battle plans anymore. Let's go check on the soldiers. Queen Sylvanas and Jaina, who were beside Duque, nodded at the same time. On the beach of Azeroth, huge towers rose from the ground. Those were temporary mage towers. Of course, they couldn't compare to the original mage towers, but as a pure mana amplification, it was already very impressive. A little further away from the mage tower was a modular bunker. These bunkers were all the same size, about 20 square meters in size. A few days ago, they were just steel frames. After being transported here from the Iron Furnace Castle, they were quickly poured with cement that had been mixed on the spot. The human engineers were using shovels to cover up the bunkers that were starting to take shape. Inside the bunkers, there would be a dwarven cannon or a few crossbowmen using exorcism arrows blessed by the holy light. With the bunkers as cover, the center of Azeroth was filled with well-organized artillery positions. If there was enough time, Duque was even willing to build an east-west railway in Azeroth. Unfortunately, this was a position that was destined to be abandoned, so what the human engineers and dwarves were busy with was a huge asphalt road that could allow 8 carriages to pass side by side. How long until everything is ready? Duque asked Lang Bronzebeard, who was in charge of defense. The dwarf prince, whose lifelong goal was adventure, had big dark bags under his eyes. We can fight at any time, but the longer we fight, the higher the chance of survival for our brothers. They are all good men of the Alliance. Duque was filled with emotion as he looked at the soldiers in the distance who were skillfully preparing for battle. He didn't know whether it was right or wrong to pull the Alliance elites who didn't need to come here. These soldiers were not ordinary rookies. Most of them were veterans who had participated in the first and second battles of the Door of Darkness. When they joined the army, the youngest among them was a young soldier of 14 or 15 years old, while the oldest was only a young soldier of 18 or 19. They came from various countries, and most of them had experienced the cruelest battle to defend the capital. At the very least, they had participated in 2 major battles with more than 200,000 people. In the wilderness, in the depths of forests, in swamps, they had built bonfires, set up camps, endured mosquito bites, and gnawed on stinky jerky and wheat cakes. Then, they risked their lives to fight against enemies that were far larger than them. Orcs, trolls, ogres, and even goblins, who were several stories tall. They had never been afraid. They repeated themselves in the baptism of war day by day, and little by little, they turned from ignorant rookies into elite veterans who dominated the major battlefields. Only this way could they be awarded the rank of sergeant after the second battle of the Door of Darkness. But this was just the beginning. Then, for the arrival of this day, they were arranged to go to various areas where demons ran rampant and constantly sharpened their skills and tactics through the bloodiest battles. They fought satyrs, fought void trolls, and were even organized to face the hellfire summoned by human warlocks. 15 years passed in the blink of an eye. After such a long time, most of them were middle-aged, and the youngest was nearly 30 years old. They had their own families and children. Many kingdoms could not afford to support so many full-time soldiers, so they would choose to let these people retire and send them back to being farmers. But with Duke's order, these elite warriors who had long passed the peak of their physical strength were left in the Dark Portal's guards. Just for this day. Because they had the best martial arts and the most mature hearts. They would not lose their courage in an instant just because they saw a huge and terrifying demon and become trash that could be slaughtered by the demon. Duque said in a deep voice, "Gather the soldiers. I have something to say." Half an hour later, in addition to the garrison troops, 50,000 soldiers arrived from a vast position that was more than 10 kilometers long from the north to the south, forming 5 huge phalanxes. Duque led the generals, kings, of the alliance, as well as the senior and junior generals, to the high platform, looked at the whole army, and took a deep breath. The weather was getting colder, and the slightly cold wind blew on their faces, making their noses hurt. But Duque could feel the soldiers' hearts were burning, and their burning gazes said it all. Duque raised his hand, hit his chest, and gave a military salute. Every general below followed suit and saluted. What followed the military salute of the generals was the uniform sound of metal clanging against each other. On the high platform, Duque took a step forward and looked at the elites of the alliance in front of him. More than 30% of the low-grade professionals were armed with all kinds of black technology, and they were a real army of tigers and wolves. From their eyes, Duque saw vitality, pride, and rising fighting spirit. There was no draft paper, and there was no need for draft paper. 15 years of being a commander had trained Duque's unnatural ability to speak without a script. Standing in front of a silver magic microphone, Duque's voice spread throughout the army. "Everyone, why have we gathered on this strange land today to prepare for battle? This is not our land, not our family, not the land where our people live and multiply. Why should we fight to the death for it?" After a pause, Duque answered his own question. "Let me tell you, this is for the survival of the world. This is not a joke. It is not something that is too far away from us. Because we are about to face the largest demon army in the history of this world, the Burning Legion. Once Archimond, the commander of the Burning Legion, takes the power of the World Tree on Mount Hyjal behind us, all life in the world will be polluted and destroyed." At this point, there was a low commotion in the 5 huge phalanxes, but it quickly subsided. Chapter 9:13. Once that happens, no one in the world of Azeroth will be able to escape death. There will no longer be living fish in the sea, rivers, and lakes. There will only be countless rotting corpses. The crops in the fields will no longer grow and turn into man-eating monsters. The water in the deep wells will turn into green poison. You, your family, your people, who will be able to continue living? No one. Not a single one. We will all die. When that time comes, the entire world will perish. You and your family will become rotting and dirty corpses. You will meet your end amidst the evil laughter of the demons. Tell me, do you want such a future? As Duque's impassioned voice fell, an earth-shattering roar came from below. We don't want it. Duque waved his fist. That's right. We don't want it. We want to continue living. We want peace for our descendants. We want to multiply. So, what are we going to say to the damn demons with our swords and cannons? Get lost. Go to hell. Demons, go back to where you came from. It was a messy answer, but it was more real. The 50,000-strong army was like 5 huge boiling pots. They responded to Duque's words with a loud and enthusiastic voice. Duque looked at the roaring expressions on the faces of the soldiers who were no longer young. He was satisfied. He was really satisfied. It was absolutely necessary to have a morale-boosting rally. Knowing what they were fighting for and who their enemies were would make the soldiers more courageous and determined to fight. Duque let the soldiers shout for almost 30 seconds. The next second, he pressed his hands in the air and made a mute gesture. It was as if an invisible giant magic hand had isolated the air and stopped the sound from spreading. Every big shot and general of the alliance was surprised to find that the soldiers who were shouting just a second ago had all quietened down. All the voices stopped abruptly. They were not inanimate objects. They were not the zombies used as cannon fodder by the Calamity Army. They were the most elite troops of the Alliance. They were proud soldiers who had experienced countless battles. If it had been any other general with lower contributions, they wouldn't have been able to suppress them. However, in front of Duque, they were very disciplined. When Duque wanted to speak, he was as docile as a sheep. That's right. This was Duque. He was the #1 hero of the Eastern Kingdom Alliance, who had led the entire Eastern Kingdom Alliance to victory in war after war, and saved the humans, high elves, dwarves, and pygmies from extinction. Looking at Duque's face, people naturally thought of the Great Retreat after the fall of Stormwind City, the Battle of the Southern Sea, the Battle of Paladin Bay, the Battle of Lordaeron City, the Great Battle of Black Rock Mountain, and the latest Dalajan Coalition War and other glorious victories. Only Duke Marcus had such an exaggerated and unsurpassable prestige to suppress these arrogant soldiers and generals, making them feel proud of themselves and obey his orders. In front of Duque's halo of victory, even the Sin Dorii crown worn by Queen Shirley and the Craterus crown on Jaina's head paled in comparison. However, this wasn't important. The two queens locked their burning gazes firmly on Duque's stalwart back, their eyes blurred. Duque spoke again. Yes, everyone is right. Planet Azeroth is our home, our homeland. Whoever wants to trample on it will have to step over our dead bodies first. That's right. Maybe we will all die. Maybe even our corpses will be desecrated by the evil Calamity Army. We might even have our souls imprisoned and helplessly become evil accomplices. However, again. What? Duque's voice suddenly rose by an octave, and he waved his hand. We have fought with our own will, with all our strength. Even at the end of the world, facing our ancestors, we can proudly announce that we have a clear conscience. So, for the future of our descendants, go and fight. Go and roar. With our lives and souls, let's give our strongest voice to the damned demons. Duque raised his right fist with all his strength and pointed it at the sky. Long live the future. Long live Azeroth. Thousands of arms were raised high. It was a forest of swords. It was a mountainous sea of hammers. It was the unyielding will of billions of Azeroth creatures. They completely vented the heat in their chests, letting the thousands of voices converge into one. Long live the future. Long live Azeroth. Duque waved his hand. In the name of the Alliance Commander, I announce that the Mount Hyjal operation has officially begun. Everyone, get into position. Let's go. The square formation that was extremely neat a moment ago began to quickly disperse in an orderly manner. Under the command of the middle and high-level generals, the soldiers ran to their respective positions. The once silent beachhead erupted again. Even though they were several kilometers away, they could still feel the murderous aura from above. Turayan and Bulang came before Duque and saluted to Duque. Commander, do you have any other orders? Turayan asked. Duque looked at the undulating beach and sighed softly. Crossing the endless sea to send an army of 100,000 plus heavy equipment was already the limit of what the Alliance could do. It would be great if they could bring the main force of the Alliance here. Unfortunately, there were not so many ifs in the world. Duque said, soldiers without the will to fight can't face a terrifying existence that is several times stronger than them. But if the will to fight is too strong, it will only cause the good men of the Alliance to die here in vain. Tell the brats below that this is only the first battle. I don't need them all to die here. Follow the rules and retreat when it's time. I have prepared a magic array near Orgrimmar to send the troops in their best condition to the mountainside of Mount Hyjal. Turayan punched his chest with one hand. His gauntlet hit his breastplate with a crisp clang. Understood. Then Turayan and Bulang went down. Just as they were about to walk down the high platform, Duque's voice floated over. Remember to get out of Mount Hyjal alive, and then find a way to get out alive. Turayan and Bulang looked at each other and smiled. Boss, you're so demanding. Of course, if we're going to fight with our lives on the line, Mograine will be the commander here. Waving his hand, Turayan's elegant figure before he left was imprinted in Duque's eyes. Mograine patted Duque's back a little grumpily. Damn it, you make it sound like I'm an idiot who only knows how to fight with my life on the line. Duque didn't reply. He looked at Turayan, and then at Mograine. Duque was deep in thought. Fate had changed. Chapter 9:14. Looking back, many people who should have died in battle were unknowingly saved by Duque. Without Duque, Turalyon would have counterattacked Draenor after the second dark portal and disappeared with the big explosion. 9 out of 10 he was dead. If Kalia was not hidden, then Kalia, who had completely lost hope in life, would have chosen to live in seclusion after the fall of Rotterdam. The scattered people of Rotterdam would have fought for themselves and composed a sad and touching death war song. The crazy Scarlet Crusade would have been born. Sidon Dathrahan's body would have been taken by the Dreadlord and harmed everywhere. Abendus would have died tragically in Hearth Valley. Alexandros Mograine would have been even more tragic. He would have been killed by his own son, Reynold. Bewitched by the Dreadlord who pretended to be Sidon Dathrahan, Reynold deceived his father and let old Mograine fall into the trap of the Scourge army. Reynold picked up the Ashbringer and killed his biological father. Although old Mograine was responsible for Reynold's downfall, patricide had always been one of the deepest sorrows since ancient times. There was also Queen Sylvie. At this point in history, she was already a banshee of death. She was bound by Arthas like a dog. Instead of having bright skin and a hearty and proud expression, she could still be alive and kicking by his side. Thinking that this might be the end of the world, Duque let out a long sigh and secretly swore in his heart. Damn it, Archimonde, you must die. Duke's inadvertent expression of great pressure was seen by the two queens at the same time. Jaina's eyes turned. Just as she was thinking of something, she caught a glimpse of the fireworks pinned to her chest armor. It was a small white fireworks used for funerals. She deliberately pinned it there to remind her of the vengeance of her father and brother. Jaina pursed her lips. When Sylvanas caught up with Duque, Jaina was still half a step too slow. But she did not regret it. At this moment, Mount Hyjal had become a huge pre-war construction site. At the foot of the mountain, the elves who were watching felt their hearts aching as they watched the crude orc laborers chopping down the 100-year-old trees with great effort. They used the thick trunks of the trees as the pillars of the huge blockhouses, and sharpened the smaller branches and inserted them into the ground, facing the foot of the mountain, to serve as antlers. One after another, archer towers in the style of orcs rose from the ground. Tall and slender trolls nimbly climbed up the towers. They took a large piece of metal from the goblins and stuffed it outside the arrow tower to act as a shield for themselves. Then, they arranged the javelins provided by the humans in a position that was convenient for them to reach. The spearhead, which was made of fine steel, shone brightly in the dusk. At the mountain pass, the wide ground on both sides was surrounded by wooden stakes and thick ropes. There were signs in all kinds of languages stuck on them, and there were even pictures of goblins scribbled on them. Holding his beloved axe, Bloodhowl, Grum muttered, "Thrall, I don't trust those dwarves at all. Although their skin is also green. Look, since noon, those idiots have already blown up more than a dozen of their own people." Thrall patted the shoulder of this senior who had narrowly escaped death. Grom. First, it wasn't the orcs, trolls, or taurens who died. Second, they aren't even afraid of death, so why should we worry for them? Before Sal could finish speaking, there was a loud boom sound. At least half a dozen goblins were blown into the sky and then disintegrated into green and red parts, scattering evenly on the ground within a radius of 100 meters. Then, the nearby goblins all gaped as they watched their companions succeed in courting death as if they were watching fireworks. Some even whistled. There was no need for the orcs to criticize them. A goblin sitting on a thick metal robot that was as tall as 3 people picked up the metal loudspeaker and cursed. His sharp and unpleasant voice could be heard within a radius of hundreds of meters. "Frank, I told you, don't let those idiots go to where we buried the mines. And, I repeat, don't eat a cigar when burying the mines." The goblins below looked at their boss with puzzled and amused expressions. The goblin flipped out. "Bastard! Who dares to not listen to me? Half of your wages will be deducted. This time, the goblins below all seemed to have been ruthlessly whipped. They all obeyed as if they were facing a great enemy. On the other side, Grom slapped his forehead. His expression was clearly telling Thrall, "Look." Thrall couldn't help but bare his teeth. But then he changed the topic. "But, if this world has a future, I will consider recruiting goblins into the tribe." Even someone as bold as Grom couldn't help but exclaim in a low voice. Thrall took out 2 axes from the box beside him. One was an incomparably crude stone axe made from sharp stones and thick branches. The other was a steel axe that emitted a cold light. It was obvious that it was a killing weapon. One is what we can make now, and the other is what the humans just gave us. You know what I'm trying to say. Grom was silent. He was most aware of the backwardness of the orcs in the field of forging and metallurgy. In the 10 years of living in the forest of Tirisfal, an axe forged by the dark iron dwarves, even if it had been chipped countless times, was still a treasure in the eyes of the orc soldiers. The most exaggerated thing was that this axe had changed owners for a total of 15 times, and it had never been eliminated. But compared to the stone axes and hammers that were easily broken by humans, the sturdy dwarven products were, of course, more trustworthy. In the end, wasn't this the backwardness of technology? The backwardness of civilization? Backwardness meant being beaten. This was inevitable. Wajin came up and dispelled Grom's last hope with one sentence. The trolls have spent 8,000 years to prove that using flesh and blood to fight against a higher civilization would lead to a tragic end. The Lordaeron continent that you ravaged 14 years ago, the capitals of the human kingdoms that you destroyed, were all once the territory of the Amani Troll Empire. Grom no longer raised any objections. Thrall set the tone for this matter. We'll talk about those things later. Right now, the Burning Legion is our real enemy. We are not fighting for the Alliance at this moment, but for the survival of the tribe. Since Duke Marcus has treated us with sincerity, we must return the favor of a warrior. Understood. Several tribal leaders answered in unison. However, looking at the noisy goblins, Thrall was thoughtful. Late at night, the tribes at the foot of the mountain and the alliance on the mountainside were still preparing for war all night under the lights. Duque suddenly received an urgent call from Sylvanas. "Second sister is in a hurry. Come quickly," Lilith nervously informed Duque, who knew, as soon as he entered Queen Sylvia's tent, Duque's knee was hit by an arrow. Chapter 9:15. When Duque lifted the curtain of the tent and went in, he was shocked by the darkness inside, and then he was shot. The moment he was hit by the arrow, Duke recalled a famous saying that had spread far and wide. "I used to be a dragon-slaying hero, until I got shot in the knee." Well, those were all unimportant things. The point was, Duque did not understand why Queen Mao she shot him with an arrow. Before entering the tent, the system elf helped him scan it, and there was only Queen Mao she in the tent. What the hell? Or did I make a big mistake? Queen Mao she finally couldn't stand me having a harem and wanted to murder her husband? Is this the legendary tragic ending of killing her husband with a hatchet? Full of questions, along with the rapid spread of numbness from his knee, almost drove Duque crazy. The strong numbness almost made Duque fall on the ground. The next second, Duque suddenly found himself buried in a pair of elastic Mount Hyjal. This is... Duque heard Queen Mao she's voice. "Sorry, I used a strong anesthetic on the arrow. But it doesn't matter, it won't cause any harm to your body." For some reason, Duque suddenly remembered. According to history, after Nazul's control weakened, Queen Shi, who had become a death banshee, relied on an arrow coated with a powerful poison to shoot Arthas. Arthas was almost completely killed. Damn it. How could I forget that Sister Mao she is a master of poison? By the way, what did I do wrong? She actually wants to use the arrow, which is worth at least 1,000 gold coins, to kill me? Duque felt like he was in a trance. He wanted to curse, but the feeling of having his face pinched by the Mount Hyjal was great. No. Now was not the time to worry about this. What did Queen Mao she want to do? Duque wanted to open his mouth, but he found that his whole body was numb and he could not even speak. "Don't worry, how could I hurt you? If big sister and third sister come back, they will skin me alive." Queen Sylvie laughed as she dragged Duque to the bed like a dead dog. Surrounded by darkness, his hands and feet were numb. Through the system elf scan, Duque found that Queen Sylvie had taken off his magician robe and was tying him to the bed. It was as if she was dissecting a frog from his biology class. A cold light shone in the darkness. Duque's scalp went numb. He could recognize it even if he turned to ash. That was the ultimate weapon that countless Azeroth players had used before he traveled to this world. It was the weapon that had skinned billions of ferocious monsters. Even the behemoth and the dragon race were not spared. It was the ultimate weapon that the players would not change even if they changed their weapons countless times. Skinning knife. In Duque's mind, the scene of him being skinned and dying tragically appeared. Not good. Guards. Protect the Emperor. Some unruly people want to harm me. With a flash of a knife, Queen Sylvie skillfully used the skinning knife to help Duque cast armor break. Then, the candlelight lit up. In the flickering candlelight, Duque saw Sylvanas, who was wearing the queen's crown but only the robe of insight. The robe of insight was known to be on the same level as a virgin killer who wore a sweater. Duque's nose was about to bleed. At this moment, Duque just wanted to say, "You, a ranger, hunter, actually snatched the cloth armor. You're breaking the rules." Well, the dignified queen of Sindorii was dressed like this to feast his eyes. Duque suddenly felt a sense of vagueness that he could die without regrets. Queen Sylvie tilted her head, her face red. "Originally, I didn't want to start this hunting ritual. I always thought that you were my prey, and no one could take you away." Speaking of this, Sylvanas sighed. "Who would have thought that an Archimond would come out? Well, I can only let you have it." Queen Sylvie sat condescendingly, her slender fingers stretched out and tapped on Duque's chest, showing a beautiful arc. She made an extremely domineering declaration. "I declare in the name of the Queen of Sindorii, Sylvanas Windrun, you, Duke Marcus, will be my prey for the rest of your life. You are mine. Without my permission, no one can take you away. Until the end of the world." With that, she gently dripped a drop of anti-paralysis potion into Duque's mouth. Queen Sylvie leaned down and used her fiery red lips to enjoy her prey. In the face of bullying and oppression, Duque's godly sword rose up to resist. It stubbornly faced the attack, trying to pierce through the devouring darkness. Finally, the sword light shot out, scaring the cruel queen so much that her face turned pale. Queen Sylvie's more miscalculation was yet to come. She didn't know that Duque didn't necessarily need his muscles to control his body's movements. He could use his magic circuit to control his body. Duque launched a great counterattack. He attacked. Duque's godly sword shocked the world. One sword light froze 19 continents. Duque told Queen Sylvie with hard facts. Those who play with fire will burn themselves, and those who play with swords will be hurt by swords. I don't care if you're a high and mighty queen. You're also my Aurelia's sister. Kill without mercy. With one slash, blood splattered everywhere. The queen, who was hit by the sword, was like a swan shot by an arrow. She raised her neck high and let out a scream. "You bastard," Sylvanas cursed. "Come on, let's fight." Duque was full of fighting spirit. Berserker Duke activated Godly Sword Lunge 999 times. He directly sent Queen Sylvie to heaven. At dawn, Queen Sylvie hugged Duque tightly, tears still hanging on her long and straight eyelashes. The two woke up almost at the same time. Their eyes met. There was an indescribable deep affection and uncountable bitterness. If the scout ship's report was correct, the first battle of Mount Hyjal would begin this morning. There was not much time. Sigh. The two sighed softly at the same time and fell silent at the same time. Without a word, Duque got up. She was clearly a noble queen, but Sylvanas was like a gentle and virtuous peasant woman serving her husband, personally helping Duque put on his shirt and other clothes. Duque noticed that this brand new shirt had clumsy workmanship that could be said to be an insult to the elven costume designer, but the shirt was extremely fitting. Duque revealed a gentle smile. "Thank you." Servana's eyes were suddenly filled with tears. "Don't you dare damage the shirt." Right? If the shirt wasn't damaged, he would naturally be fine. The smile on Duque's face grew wider, and he raised a wooden scepter that looked like a drumstick in his hand. "A mere Archaron can't do anything to me. I'm the man who will take Leish, the legendary scepter of the Guardian, in the future." Unknowingly, Servana's eyes became infatuated. Chapter 9:16. Hearing that the descending superdemon was Archimond, one of the 3 leaders of the Burning Legion, after witnessing the terrifying power that could destroy the world, many cowards were so scared that their legs trembled, and some even peed their pants. Even the bravest warriors crossed the sea and came to this foreign land with the idea of fighting to the death. There was only Duque, and there was only one Duque in the world. He had the ability and courage to say such a sentence. "A mere Archimond can't do anything to me." Suddenly, Servana smiled. Her smile was as bright as a spring breeze. There was no other reason. She suddenly felt that only this man in front of her, who looked down on all the heroes in the world and viewed billions of demons as ants, was the great hero in her heart who was worthy of being entrusted to her for thousands of years until eternity. Queen Sylvanas had the urge to hug Duque from behind. She gave up. If that was the case, then what was the difference between her and those weak women who could only watch their men go to the battlefield and could only hope for a child before the battle, and were afraid that the child would be a posthumous child? She was Sylvanas, the queen of the kingdom of Dorii, the Valkyrie on the battlefield. If there was still a glimmer of hope in this world, then this glimmer of hope must have been fought for by her and Duque. So in just 2 or 3 minutes, she was already standing beside Duque in her military uniform. Duque seemed to want to say something but stopped. Servanas glared at him and made a seemingly ferocious expression. He fiercely spat at Duque and said while gnashing his teeth, "Alright, it's my mistake. I'll look for Riadaline to treat her later." Duque rubbed his eyebrows. Most of the Alliance had a policy of taking a holiday before a battle, but the night before the battle seemed to be a little bad. Sigh. Duque looked into the distance, which was the east of Azhara's beachhead. As the last unmanned boat anchored offshore and used for detection tilted and sank, Turalian finally gave the order, "Ready." At first, it was just a few inconspicuous bubbles, but soon the sea seemed to be boiling and there were bubbles everywhere. In the end, it was even connected into a continuous gurgling sound. The first ugly head floated to the surface. In the command post, Turalian could clearly see the monster through his binoculars. Mermaid? He was indeed a merman. Turalian was no stranger to the Murlocs. Even today, there were more than 30,000 Murlocs in the Alliance. They belonged to the Murloc prophet Magur and reported directly to the king of Stormwind, Varian. In fact, everyone knew that for some reason, the mixed legion of Murlocs and Naga had always been loyal to Duque. It was not important. The Murloc in his field of vision was even larger. It didn't look like a fishman at all. It looked more like an adult hippopotamus. It wasn't just one, but thousands upon thousands of fishmen that floated to the surface of the water. They all looked the same. Their teeth that were even sharper and more sinister, as well as their scarlet eyes that exuded an ominous aura, were all telling Turalian that there was something wrong with this vanguard of the Burning Legion. Soon, the Alliance soldiers saw a male Naga that was one size larger. These deep-sea monsters with the same pair of scarlet eyes drove the merfolk towards the shore. In just a few minutes, they had slowly come ashore from the shallows. They were less than 50 meters away from the most front line of the beachhead blockhouse. "Fire arrows." Turalian's order was quickly transmitted to the position below through the most primitive loudspeaker. The enemy was the Burning Legion, and no one knew if the magic transmission would fail. The communication method that was so useful in the last battle at the Dark Portal could only be used as a support here. The most primitive communication method was more secure. A narrow fire dragon ignited at the back of the bunkers. The High Elven Rangers had already raised their longbows, and there were burning arrows on their bows. As the red flag on the towering arrow tower waved down, the The silent signal made the bowstrings vibrate in unison. The next moment, most of the soldiers on the beachhead saw a fiery red line flying into the sky. The number of this batch of arrows was so small that it couldn't even be called an arrow rain at all. Naturally, the fire arrows caused almost no direct damage, but the expression on Turalian's face did not change at all as he watched the battle from afar. He was waiting for the follow-up effect, and he would see it soon. The fire arrows ignited as soon as they touched the seawater. Of course, the seawater would not burn. What was ignited was the oil that had been dumped into the sea early in the morning. For this battle, the Alliance spent a lot of money to buy more than a dozen ships of crude oil from the goblins who wanted money even in the end of the world. Oil would float on the sea, and if it was before Dubois transmigrated, this would undoubtedly be an ecological disaster. Now, once the oil was ignited, it would immediately form thick smoke. And because of the unique geographical environment of Azhara, there was a strong wind blowing from the west to the east. All of a sudden, as long as the Murlocs and Nagas dared to come out of the water, they would all be hit. They would either be wrapped in flames, or choked by the thick smoke and could not open their eyes. For marine creatures, being burned by fire was definitely a very rare thing. If these Murlocs were still ordinary Murlocs, they would definitely be scared and run around the beach, letting out miserable and annoying screams. But it was as if they could not feel the flames roasting their flesh and scales. Instead, like madmen, they were like fireballs that could run away, directly charging towards the beachhead blockhouses. Fortunately, they did not have such tenacious vitality. Most of them rushed 20 meters before falling on the beach with strange cries, becoming twitching corpses in the flames. But this scene made Turayan, who was watching the battlefield from afar, frown uncontrollably. At the end of the day, the Murlocs were just cannon fodder. This almost made him activate the next batch of traps. If there were stronger ones, then wouldn't the Burning Legion have some tricks up their sleeves? Soon, the first wave of probing attacks ended. After thousands of corpses were left on the beach, no more Murlocs rushed to the shore. The sea was still burning. Following the tide, the rolling waves of fire slapped on the reefs or the beach. Turayan noticed that the sea was still boiling. It had nothing to do with the ignited oil. It was a large number of Murlocs hidden under the water surface blowing bubbles. Immediately, a huge figure rose from the sea, causing the hearts of every Alliance soldier to jump. They were generally more than 6 meters tall, with a slightly horizontal and burly body. Their green skin glistened in the flames, and the huge iron anchors in their hands that were more than 3 meters long were even more shocking. Malfurion, okay. Star translated, of God. Turayan finally gave the order from the command post. Chain grenades. Of the sea. What Nagoth sea of the sea. The two small iron balls were chained together. When the iron ball and the iron chain were shot out of the cannon, if the target was hit, the iron ball would be pulled by the iron chain and spin continuously, breaking the mast of the enemy sailboat. Two small iron balls were chained together. When the iron balls and chains were shot out of the cannon, the sea giant's ankles would be pulled down by the force of the impact. From the small bunker on the beach, small steel cannons fired black chain bullets, accurately hitting the sea giant's ankles, causing its huge body to stumble. Looking at the struggling sea giants, Turalian raised his right hand and swung it down. Turalian's adjutant immediately understood and gave the order that he had already prepared. First artillery team, first shooting Zhu, 3 consecutive shots. Turalian's adjutant immediately understood, and in one breath, he gave the order that he had already prepared. Artillery team 1, shooting Zhu Yuan 1, 3 consecutive shots. Behind a small hill at the back of the beach, the dwarven cannoneers were busy communicating with each other using hand signals and semaphore signals. They fired a large number of mortar shells at their predetermined targets. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. After the ear-piercing sound of something tearing through the air, a series of rumbling explosions rang out. The entire beach instantly turned into a fiery hell. The sea giants' crude leather clothes and shoulder armor made from the skulls of large deep-sea creatures could not withstand the explosion of modern gunpowder. Flesh and blood flew everywhere. A few unlucky ones were blown to death by the mortar shells. Perhaps this was a kind of luck. Because their compatriots were often too tenacious, they had to struggle on the beach for a long time before they finally breathed their last. Turalian, who was observing through his binoculars, said, "First artillery team, retreat." The adjutant seemed hesitant. The situation was just right. If there were 2 more waves, the effect would be better. After all, it was very inconvenient to install the mortar in this era. It would be troublesome to adjust the design parameters after moving the position. Turalian's thunderous roar followed, "Execute the order." The adjutant shivered and immediately relayed the order. Fortunately, the alliance was not greedy. The Burning Legion's counterattack arrived almost as soon as the artillery team retreated. It was the group of gargoyles that swooped down from the clouds. They swooped down so quickly that the alliance's griffins could not reach the scene in time. Unfortunately, they missed their target and had no choice but to engage in battle with the griffin squadron that arrived later. On the sea, a figure that seemed to be standing on the waves snorted coldly. Useless. It was a great lich. He gently clenched his claws that were full of white bones. In the next second, a scream came from beside him. "My lord, spare me." It was a huge female Naga with a beautiful face but a dangerous aura all over her body. In the original history, she single-handedly directed the fall of the Blood Elf King Kale, and became Illidan's sharpest lackey. She was the former Queen Azhara's personal maid, the future Kolaifong Queen Vashj. Originally, she should not have directly participated in the Burning Legion's Mount Hyjal operation. But under the teasing of fate, she unexpectedly joined the Burning Legion in advance and became the vanguard of the invasion of Mount Hyjal. Useless trash. Since you are still of some use to the Burning Legion, get lost. The Great Lich said with extreme contempt. "Thank you, Lord Reki Winterfrost." Vashj hurriedly dived into the deep sea. The beach fell into a strange situation. The Burning Legion stopped attacking. Only the dying sea giants were still struggling. Even the bubbles that floated to the surface had disappeared. Just as Turalian was confused, the adjutant's reminder startled him. "Look." Following the adjutant's finger, Turalian was shocked to find that the horizon had become the horizon. Chapter 9:18. The Alliance soldiers who had just repelled the Burning Legion's first wave of attack were dumbfounded. The sea had turned into land? What was going on? Every soldier felt that their brains were not enough to process the situation. Moreover, the water on the beach suddenly receded, leaving only jagged rocks and gravel exposed in the air in the place that was previously full of water. Turalian's reaction was still the fastest. "Retreat! Retreat! Retreat! All the frontline positions near the coast evacuate. Half of the second-line positions. Don't worry about the equipment. Evacuate the people first." When the emergency evacuation order was given, the entire beach was in an uproar. In this day and age, the dwarves were the best at using cannons. Therefore, most of the people who had set up positions on the beach were dwarves. These guys who had developed horizontally took quick steps with their short legs, retreating from the large preset pipes behind the bunkers along the arrows. In less than 5 minutes, all the Alliance troops within 100 meters of the beach had been evacuated. Only then did everyone see that there seemed to be an additional blue line in front of the horizon that suddenly appeared on the sea. When the commanders used their binoculars to take a closer look, they realized that it was a super tsunami that was enough to completely destroy the entire coastal defense line. Just looking at the terrifying waves that were at least 10 stories high, they felt like their minds were going to collapse. "No. Damn it. Continue to retreat. Second line." Turalian felt like he was going to collapse. Although Duque had told him time and time again to let go of his phenomenal power and put the most terrifying situation on the Burning Legion, who would have thought that the Burning Legion was not playing a landing battle, nor did they pull a few hundred ships over, but directly using a huge island to crash over? Ever since Thoradin the Great established the Arather Empire, there had never been a military academy that taught commanders to be careful of an entire island crashing into them during a beach defense battle. Suddenly, Duque's voice was transmitted through magic to the command post. The third line of defense is also evacuating. The fourth line of defense is evacuating at 1, 3, 6, and 7 o'clock. The rest of the troops on the high ground do not move. Give up after evacuating the 3rd, 5th, 8th, and 11th passageways. They will be flooded, so there is no need. The 2nd Dwarf Steam Tank Regiment is ready to counterattack. Listen to the order to enter the tank trench in 5 minutes. Don't worry about the water, the tank is there. 3rd, 4th, and 5th Artillery Squads, prepare to advance slowly into the barrage. Fire at A3, B7, and C4. All Griffins move out. Crane wing formation at the front, and one-line snake formation at the back. No one understood how Duque came to this conclusion. To be honest, it was a big taboo to command beyond one's rank. It would affect the prestige of the commander on the spot. However, in the face of such an earth-shattering attack, protecting the troops was their top priority. If the adjutants were to hurriedly transmit the general order to their subordinates, then the orderly evacuation would become incomparably chaotic. My apologies. Turalian bowed to the mirror image of Duque. It's not your fault. Asking a human commander to command a cannon system that the dwarves have yet to fully understand is too difficult. I will write an artillery command manual for the Alliance, Duque said calmly. As for Duke, Turalian was in awe. During the 10 years of Duque's disappearance, the military of various countries had focused on studying Duque's battle examples. They had pessimistically discovered that Duque's various war inventions, tactics, and tactical ideas were at least 50 years ahead of the entire Eastern Kingdom. If it were not for Duque's sudden appearance, early unification, and various tactical strategies that were still considered exaggerated to this day, the Alliance would have paid the price of at least 500,000 soldiers dying in battle and 3 million civilians perishing. Of course, none of the military bigwigs thought that it was the work of a transmigrator. Most of them thought that it was just a whimsical idea of the mysterious pharaoh. 10 minutes later, when most of the troops had successfully evacuated, the monstrous wave finally slammed into the shore with the momentum of God's hand slapping down on the mortal world. The sand and stones on the shore flew into the sky. The corpse of the deep-sea giant, which weighed more than 10 tons, and the small bunkers on the shore that could only accommodate 2 dwarves and a small cannon were all thrown into the sky like toys thrown aside by a naughty child. Even the headquarters of the Alliance, which was a full 5 kilometers away from the beach, could clearly feel the strong vibration. The entire wooden house in the kitchen outside the headquarters, which was built with wooden planks, was creaking as if it was under unimaginable pressure. Its wooden walls, floor, doors, and windows were all trembling as if they would fall apart at any moment. The ingredients on the wooden table and the chopping board were like freshly cooked popcorn, bouncing up and falling to the ground with a bang, bang, bang. Turalian and the other commanders were suddenly extremely glad that their own headquarters was made of reinforced concrete. Although in Duque's opinion, the cement made of brittle, low-quality steel and volcanic ash was simply substandard, it was really many times better than the wooden house that was like tofu dregs. Previously, there were people who complained about the smell of cement and limestone in the command post, but now, everyone could only feel lucky. Finally, the huge island that was like a continent where the Burning Legion was located appeared in front of everyone. Whether it was the Alliance by the beach of Azhara or the bigwigs of various races who were watching the live broadcast on Mount Hyjal, all of them were dumbfounded. That was a zombie tide that was calculated in the millions. At the end of the dark, almost endless sea of zombies, which could only be seen with high-powered binoculars, a large number of Burning Legion demons that were more than 5 meters tall were ready to go. Fortunately, all of them were veterans, and fortunately, Duque's precise command of the trench had allowed the Alliance to avoid more than 90% of the losses. Otherwise, panic would have erupted uncontrollably at this time. Duque pondered for a moment. Turalian, Bulang, I'll leave this to you. The two replied in unison, yes. Less than half a minute after Duque's image disappeared, an earth-shattering cannon suddenly sounded. Listening to the sharp whistling sound coming from the sky, the commander of the Burning Legion on the huge floating island, Reki Winterfrost, showed a puzzled expression. Unlike the liches who were loyal to the Lich King, Reki Winterfrost was the most fanatical follower of the Burning Legion. His powerful magic power and cruel demonic spells made him a capable subordinate under Kill Jaden. Originally, Reki Winterfrost should have first appeared during the siege of Hearth Valley, but history was greatly skewed. In this life, he had not appeared at the front line at all until today. Due to his hatred for the Calamity Army and his loyalty to the Burning Legion, he quickly became another Archimonde's vanguard general after the Archimonde's arrival. Chapter 9:19. To be honest, Archimonde looked down on the combat power of the Scourge Legion. In the eyes of the commander of the Burning Legion, zombies and ghouls were broken toys that weren't even as good as dolls. However, Reki Winterfrost persuaded Archimonde with a reason. "Honorable sir, the humans and orcs defending Mount Hyjal are as weak as these zombies. If Sir goes down personally, you probably won't enjoy the battle." Archimonde had never been afraid of godlike enemies. Back when Sardras recruited him and Kill Jaden, it was the creation titans of the Pantheon who fought head-on. So when he heard that the opponent was weak, Archimonde hesitated. That was because many of the demon legions had been pulled to the outer defense circle of Azeroth by Kill Jaden to attract the dragon aspect. He didn't have many direct demons on his side. With that in mind, he agreed. "Reki, I'll leave the task of cleaning up the trash to you. Don't call me before the enemy powerhouse comes out." But now, Reki Winterfrost felt that he might have let him down. That was because he and his men were going to face the most insane cannon of this era. Before Duque was sent flying into the void, Duque had proposed the theory of rifling to the dwarves and gnomes. Only by adding rifling to the barrel of the cannon could the cannonball have a stable trajectory, and the cannonball that was fired could be controlled. Otherwise, in this era where muzzle-loading cannons were rampant, even the best gunner wouldn't be able to predict where the cannonball would land after it had flown 2 kilometers. A gunner with an error of 100 meters was already considered a godlike gunner. In Duque's opinion, without sufficient industrial foundation, it would be impossible to cast a cannon that could fire a cannonball 5 kilometers away. After all, this involved a lot of things such as steel quality, lathe accuracy, and a series of things that were considered black technology in this era. The funny thing was that Duque had once again underestimated the abilities of the dwarves and gnomes. The gnomes never lacked ideas, but they lacked reliable ideas. Duque's successful experience on Earth had been proven and refined countless times. To the gnomes, this was simply the will of God. In the eyes of Jurban and other master craftsmen, Duque could find the path to success without failure. Duque was the true god of craftsmanship. Since it was the work of God, how could the gnomes not complete it with their lives? Maybe one day, Duque would be in a good mood and suddenly think of how to clean the radiation in the gnomes' hometown. Gnomes would be saved. So, the quality of the steel would explode? Then I'll just make the barrel thicker and bigger. Will that do? Would it explode after a few shots? My worst-case scenario is that the barrel would only be used once. You want high-precision rifling. Look at my gnome godly technique. Tie a rope to the cannon's chamber and carve out a perfect rifling with my bare hands using a hammer and chisel. The result was the 36 Lesser Duke cannons that were placed on Azhara's beach. The diameter of the barrel was 800 millimeters, and it was 10 meters long. When the cannon was unfolded and fixed, it was 28 meters long, 5 meters tall, and weighed 288 tons when it was in combat mode. It sounded like the caliber was much smaller than the small steel cannon that sent countless orcs to hell during the Battle of Blackrock Mountain 13 years ago. But if one considered that the range of the little Duque cannon was more than 4 times that of this small steel cannon, with a maximum range of more than 10 kilometers, any commander with a brain would know that the military value of the little Duque cannon was an epic-making product. If it wasn't for the equally unscrupulous mage Dalaran who had developed the upgraded military magic defensive cannon shell specifically for the mage tower in the past 10 years, using defensive arrow as the blueprint, perhaps the gnomes would have had the strength to conquer the world. But I digressed. Such a huge object had encountered great difficulties in assembling, transporting, and shooting tests. But in order to save the world, the gnome craftsmen had assembled 36 little Duque cannons within 3 days. When a shell weighed more than 3 tons, and the dwarven secret chamber guards had to use avida to turn into small giants to load the shell, one could imagine how powerful the explosion would be. The huge floating island, which was already at the edge of the beach, produced an endless and terrible storm. First, there was a strong explosion that shook the mountains. At the front edge of the floating island, not to mention the zombies at the landing point, even the thinner edges of the island were directly blown up, causing the terrifying effect of the island sinking. Everything within the range of the shell disintegrated. Whether it was an elite ghoul with a body as hard as steel, a gargoyle made of solid obsidian, or a bone dragon with incomparably thick bones, they all turned into countless pieces like butterflies in a storm. The cannonball exploded and sputtered metal shrapnel, easily shredding all the nearby existences into pieces. Even the zombies 300 meters away were blown away. Even the undead monster, Abomination, which weighed more than 5 tons and was sewn together from a large number of corpses, was blown away by the strong wind and rolled to who knows where. What's going on? Who can tell me what's going on? Reki Wintry was furious in the Soul Connection Network. It seems to be a human cannon, a low-level lich replied. Bullsh *T. Of course I know about cannons. How can they shoot so far? Under such a terrible attack, even the Calamity Army, which was claimed to have absolutely no problem with morale, could not help but fall into chaos. 5 minutes passed quickly. The sky was filled with that terrible whistling sound again. This time, Reki Wintry chose to let the liches cast a spell and set up a huge magic barrier. The next moment, the power of science and industry collided with the mysterious power of magic that had nothing to do with each other in the air. At that moment, the entire eastern sky flashed with the brilliance of magic. The frost element and dark force formed a dense array of runes in the sky that emitted an evil spiritual light. These runes formed a huge shield, resisting the kinetic energy of the huge shell. Originally, this overlapping grayish-black shield seemed to be able to resist these shells. However, when the first shell was detonated by magic in midair, the entire magic shield suddenly cracked. Countless magic runes exploded in midair, and this destruction immediately spread in all directions. The protective shield, which was constructed with the magic power of Reki Winterfrost and the other liches, could only withstand 12 super cannonballs before collapsing. As a result, 24 shells fell closer to the center of the island. It was as if there was a moment of delay before the destructive shock wave swept across the entire front of the island. Chapter 920. Tyrant and Malfurion had been focused on their work, but the horrifying explosion and light in the projection attracted their attention. Their faces, which were naturally slightly purple, were now a little pale. Ilun above, are the Alliance's weapons so terrifying now? Tyrant sucked in a breath of cold air, but she quickly patted her chest in fear. Fortunately, that hit the Burning Legion's head. Malfurion was more objective. It's fine. This level of attack is far from enough to break through the magic circle of Mount Hyjal. Also, the Alliance's strength is a good thing for us now. However, this reminds me of… The 2 night elves fell silent. It was too similar. As survivors who had personally experienced that horrifying scene, they couldn't help but think of the explosion of the Well of Eternity 10,000 years ago. Back then, the entire world of Azeroth only had one continent, Kalimdor. Back then, the Troll Empire's territory spanned across the entire continent, occupying nearly 70% of the continent's surface area. Back then, the High Elf civilization was extremely prosperous, and Queen Azhara's power could be said to rule the world. Following that earth-shattering explosion, everything changed drastically. The huge Kalimdor continent was blown into 3 pieces. Actually, it was 4 pieces, as the Night Elves thought that Pandaria was gone. The Troll Empire's soldiers began to weaken. The High Elves who advocated pulling the Burning Legion into Azeroth were exiled to the depths of the sea, cursed, and turned into the Naga of today. Fortunately, the fierce artillery fire only brought back the bad memories of Tyrant and Malfurion. On the other side, the situation on the giant island where the Burning Legion was located was very interesting. At that moment, the entire island seemed to have experienced a terrifying earthquake. The wide ground near the front of the island bulged with huge wrinkles, and the zombies who couldn't dodge in time all fell into the deep crevices and became meat pies. The towering stone peaks in front of the island that had been modified into watchtowers fell like dominoes, affecting countless undead monsters. Rush to the shore immediately, Raki Wintry ordered in a fluster. He finally understood that allowing the Undying to stay on the island would only make them targets that would be pointlessly exhausted. Even if the island hadn't completely washed up on Azhara's coast and thrown the undead into the sea, those idiots would at least walk on the seabed and complete the landing. Many zombies with missing arms and legs jumped into the sea under the command of the high-level liches and necromancers. In such a chaotic situation, only less than 10% of the frontline troops were evacuated. On the other hand, the large number of gargoyles that soared into the sky began to cause casualties to the Alliance. The Griffin Legion only blocked most of the gargoyles, and the Dwarf Knight's Tempest hammer also smashed many of the gargoyles into pieces. They scattered down like a goddess scattering flowers, but there were still many gargoyles that dived into the Alliance's formation. Every time they launched an attack from the sky, it would always bring about a reign of terror and bloodshed, or disembowel some wretch. Or he would bring someone even more pitiful into the air and then drop them down from a high place, smashing them into minced meat. Or maybe they were unlucky enough to bump into a holy knight who was guarding nearby, and they were killed by Hammer of Wrath. Bastard, wait for my troops to reach the shore? Lich Reki thought maliciously. At this moment, a large number of undead creatures surged onto the shore like a tide. The dwarf steam tanks that had just rushed into the pre-built trenches began to fire. Fire! Fire! They are antiques from 13 years ago anyway. Let them unleash their last bit of heat. Fire with all your strength, don't be afraid of blowing up. Bu Lang commanded loudly, and his thunderous roar spread throughout the front line. The old dwarf steam tanks still used the old rifled mortars. The barrels were thick and the shots were close, but the power was still there. Especially since it was the heroic weapon that ended the second battle of the Dark Portal, making this place the final home of this batch of tanks seemed to have added a special layer of meaning. The dwarf cannoneers were sweating profusely as they loaded the cannonballs and fired with the efficiency of the barrels. When these experienced cannoneers realized that the barrels were overheating, they immediately abandoned the tanks and ran away. With their short legs, they climbed onto the pre-prepared mining carts that were placed on the narrow iron rails, shook the levers, and started the human-powered mining carts to run away. Reki Winterfrost was almost mad with anger. He had lost 30% of his million-strong undead army before they even engaged the enemy. Because they fell into the sea, were washed away by the tides, and were suppressed by the floating islands, he lost another 10%. As soon as they landed, the despicable dwarves ignored the cannon fodder of the zombies and ghouls, and directly aimed at the few crypt fiends and fired, blowing up the large-sized spiders. That was not all. The vanguard was clearly close to the steel cannons, but the dwarves ran faster than rabbits with their pitiful short legs. They did not manage to catch many people alive. Without corpses, the snowball tactic that the Calamity Army was good at couldn't be carried out, and the losses were even more irreparable. Reki Winterfrost could already imagine that if Archimonde, who was resting at the back, found out about this, he would definitely not have a good time. He could only be ruthless and press his troops forward with all his might. At this moment, the huge cannons that everyone thought would not be heard for a long time suddenly sounded again. Reki was dumbfounded. He definitely did not expect that the huge cannons that could fire once every 5 minutes had stopped for so long. It was actually Turayan who personally ordered the little Duque cannon to adjust the firing elements and aim at him at the front of the island. Can the cannons kill the liches of the undead tribe? Turayan's adjutant asked. Probably not. But even if it can temporarily paralyze the Calamity Army's command, it's still a good thing. Turayan was trying his luck. Even though the huge cannonballs were obstructed, Reki Winterfrost failed once again. The dense cannonballs landed in the area he was at. Even though he was a powerful radiant moon lich, he was pushed into the rubble of a collapsed stone pillar with a muffled groan. His personal guards were in chaos. As the Death Knights were not afraid of physical attacks, they did not suffer much damage, but they still staggered from side to side. Many of the Death Knights were even blasted away, landing heavily dozens of meters away. Through the binoculars, he saw a figure surrounded by white frost elements once again stand up amidst the dust. Turayan gritted his teeth in hatred. To stab him? Turayan thought without malice. At this moment, a flash of light suddenly appeared behind Reki Winterfrost. Before anyone could react, a thin golden sword had already pierced through Reki Winterfrost's chest from behind. Chapter 921. What happened? Whether it was Turalian who was holding the binoculars, or the Alliance officers who were observing the enemy through telescopic magic, or even the Burning Legion itself, no one reacted at this moment. In the next moment, a cloud of black cheese suddenly soared from the center of the island, covering the entire sky and forming a patch of pitch-black darkness. Then the black cloud stopped at the highest point and came crashing down. Rotten Bee Swarm. It was a very signature skill. But different dreadlords had different interpretations. They were obviously dark creatures full of chaos and terror, but under the control of that person, they were played with. The dark creatures and insects that would devour everything in their path actually attacked Reki Winterfrost's back like ribbons along the designated route at high speed. This was an attack that the enemy had to save. The attack came very quickly and even had a faint ability to disrupt space. If it was a mage who flashed behind the Lich Reki, then he only had two choices left: give up on further attacks and focus on reopening the spatial rift and flashing away again. Continue to attack, but he would probably have to pay the price of his life for the sneak attack. Naturally, it was the Burning Legion's dreadlord, Ansaron. He thought his calculations were very accurate. It was beyond his imagination that someone in the Alliance dared to play the decapitation tactic at this time, but he could still make up for it. As long as the mysterious mage hero was delayed for a moment, the Burning Legion could react and skin the guy alive as a sacrifice. He also didn't think that a mage's physical damage could be that high. And Reki Winterfrost wasn't a living thing, so piercing his chest wasn't a fatal wound. Although Ansaron looked down on Reki Winterfrost, he still had to admit that this lich had some skill. No matter how weak he was, he should be able to fight back. Ansaron was wrong. Reki Winterfrost really didn't react at all. Damn it. Even a pig would cry out when it was stabbed by a sword. This guy. Ansaron could never have imagined that the sneak attack turned out to be Duque, the supreme commander of the Alliance. Ever since Duque tricked Arthes once, he had become addicted to the thrill of selling swords with one hand and crafting staffs with the other. As a warrior who was afraid to die of having his soul captured, Duque certainly would not go down personally to backstab him. The divine artifact in the hands of his clone, which had gathered 80% of his power, was the real deal. With the insane buff from the semi-divine artifact, Obsidian Queen, a normal arcane spell, speed reduction, became more than 10 times stronger. How could Reki Winterfrost have Arthes's level of magic resistance? Moreover, this lich had just used up all of his magic power to resist the cannonball, and the magic circuit constructed by the power of darkness became chaotic. As a result, the deceleration spell that Duque's doppelganger cast on him not only slowed down his movement and reaction speed, but also reduced his thinking speed to 1/10 of its usual speed. He had turned this guy into a temporary retard. After restraining was done, it was naturally time to sell the sword. Ansaron's reaction was too fast, and he did not give Duque's doppelganger a chance to land the killing blow. In the blink of an eye, Duque's doppelganger was swallowed by the darkworms. That was not important. It had already completed its mission. Before it was destroyed, it pulled out the divine artifact thin sword that was stabbed into the lich's chest and threw it out together with the staff in its left hand. The next moment, two new doppelgangers appeared. One took a divine artifact and gave Reki Winterfrost the final blow. The angel statue of Obsidian Queen gently stuck between Reki Winterfrost's eyebrows. The retard was further aggravated. At the same time, unbeknownst to anyone, a massive amount of information was forcibly extracted from Reki's mind. On the other side, the narrow and slender golden holy sword revealed its blade, and with a perfect horizontal slash, Reki Winterfrost's skull flew into the sky. The next moment, a third doppelganger appeared and took Reki's skull away. Then, all three doppelgangers disappeared at the same time. Over there! A double-headed giant sword that only the Lord of the Abyss had turned into a killing weapon that fell from the sky. It slashed through the sky and landed in a huge crater at the front of the island. It was only at this moment that the big shots of the Burning Legion realized that there was actually an Alliance powerhouse who was so daring as to hide in the crater and control a doppelganger to completely kill a Burning Legion commander. Capture him! From the center of the island, Archimonde's thunderous roar of anger came. That's right. Even if Reki Winterfrost was a weakling, he was also the commander of the Burning Legion. How could the Burning Legion face the fact that they were toyed with by a mere human who took the head of their enemy's general as easily as taking something out of their pocket? Where would Archimonde's face be? Several extremely powerful auras suddenly erupted on the island. Huge figures mixed with powerful auras rushed toward the crater, and even the surrounding space began to distort. In the command post of the Beach Alliance, after seeing the iconic staff and golden holy sword through the binoculars, how could Turayan not know that it was Duque who claimed not to interfere with command who took the lead to kill the enemy's commander? Turayan was so scared that he dropped the binoculars. If Duque was blocked on the island and beaten to death, the Alliance would really suffer a great loss if a commander was replaced by a small commander. However, with a burst of arrogant, "Ha!" laughter, Duque, who seemed to be unable to escape, actually flashed out from the only crack in space just before the space barrier completely closed. Looking at the flash light that extended from the Devil's Island all the way to the beach, Turayan's heart that was hanging in the air finally relaxed. In the command post, the light flashed, and Duque revealed his unique figure. He was wearing a swordsman's uniform, holding a staff in his left hand and a sword in his right. Seeing the number 1 Archmage and Supreme Commander of the Alliance ignore his duties and steal the job of a thief, and even risk his life to infiltrate the enemy's rear, and he succeeded, Turayan could not help but feel angry. "Your Excellency Commander Duke Marcus, please conduct yourself with dignity." The entire command post echoed with Turayan's roar, which sounded like a remonstrance but was actually a curse. Duque's cheeks twitched from the scolding, and he quickly changed the topic. "Let's not talk about anything else. Hurry up and get this thing done, I'm not a professional." With that, Duque threw Reki Winterfrost's miserable head to Turayan. Anyone with a little bit of evil would be able to sense that Reki's ferocious skull was surrounded by violent resentment. If it was not handled well, it would not be unusual for it to attach itself to an unlucky person and resurrect. Chapter 922. From Duque's point of view, Reki was a famous boss and frontline commander of the Burning Legion, so Turayan should treat him with caution. Who knew? Turayan angrily pulled out his sword from behind, and with a flash of golden holy light, he directly chopped off Reki's head. It was simple and violent, just like how some people on the beach like to play in summer with a baseball bat while blindfolded. He really didn't want to look at it. Turayan's anger had yet to subside. "Duque, I've always respected you, even if you're younger than me. Your maturity and foresight have always been a role model for me to learn from. In the 10 years that you've been missing, I've studied every single one of your battles no less than 50 times. But, at this critical moment of the world's survival, how can you be so reckless?" Duque was scared stiff. Turayan immediately put Quel'Lum back into the giant scabbard on his back, and then he strode forward. "I admit that you're a rare, wise, and strong person in the world, but please consider our feelings. If you're a guardian, and this is something that can be solved by a guardian, we'll just stay behind and support you. But this isn't. This is a terrifying event that requires the cooperation of every force in the world of Azeroth to resist. In order to deal with the Archerons, each of us even have to endure the nausea and become allies with those green-skinned monsters who have been fighting with us for 15 years. Turayan was so agitated that the arteries and veins on both sides of his neck swelled, as if 2 detonators were stuffed into them. I'm sorry. I didn't consider the overall situation. Duque realized that he was still slightly impulsive. Although under the system's calculations, he was definitely in danger, but he did not consider the feelings of the others in the Alliance. Most of the paladins were extremely principled people. Since Duque had apologized, Turayan's anger came and went quickly, and his emotions calmed down. The Alliance will never lack brave people who charge into death and despair, but what the Alliance lacks is a wise person who can lead everyone to victory. Duque, in your personal domain, none of us will ask. But when it comes to the future of the world, please consider it carefully. Got it. Duque could only sigh. All right, after Duque was taught a righteous lesson like a grandson, the bastard Turalian actually had the nerve to stick close to Duque and openly pretend to be sneaky. He asked with a volume that could be heard by the entire command post, "All right, for the sake of righteousness, I have to remind you. But in private, can you tell me what you've gained from taking such a huge risk?" Duque's face was full of embarrassment. He finally understood. Turayan would have to remonstrate with him. The alliance without Duque and the alliance with Duque were not on the same level. For the sake of the future of the alliance, Turalian, as the deputy commander of the alliance, not just in name, had to warn Duque. In private, taking the head of the enemy's general amidst thousands of soldiers and horses was the ultimate dream of every martial artist. Moreover, that was an enemy of the Burning Legion. If anyone managed to do it in private, it would be enough for them to brag about it in the tavern for the rest of their lives. So on the surface, all the generals in the command post advised Duque to behave himself. But in the end, all of their eyes were full of envy, jealousy, and hatred. "You're all dirty." Duque pretended to be angry and then ordered, "All right, in order to prevent the Alliance's warriors from making unnecessary sacrifices, start the retreat plan." For a moment, the entire command post was filled with a faint celebratory atmosphere. Why build a beachhead? Knowing the enemy's ultimate goal, why would they come to a place that was easy to attack and hard to defend instead of defending a dangerous place? Wasn't it just to test the Burning Legion's military strength and arrangements? On the other hand, if the goal was already achieved, why would they still use human lives to fill it up? That's right, in that instant, Duque had already read the information he wanted through the system Elf in Reki Winterfrost's scattered consciousness after the attack. In the eyes of ordinary people, it would be a large amount of messy and useless information. However, Duque had the system Elf. No matter how complicated and messy the information was, after being sorted out and summarized by the system, he could still deduce the number and composition of the Burning Legion's military strength. The Alliance troops on the beach began to retreat at high speed. The Burning Legion discovered something that drove them crazy. When they seemed to be able to catch those Alliance dwarves with their claws, it was as if a rope had pulled them. In the blink of an eye, they had already run to a distance that required magic to hit. When they were preparing their magic, those dwarves with short legs had already sat in smoking cars and ran to a place that could only be reached by long-range ordnance. When Anaron ordered the Air Force to chase after them, countless huge nets were shot out from the ground, covering all the gargoyles on the ground. When the Dreadlord pulled Ice Dragon over, everyone in the entire position had run away, leaving only landmines on the ground. That kind of resentment almost drove Anaron, the Dreadlord who was forced to command, mad. The Alliance's beach garrison, along the long-planned retreat route, ran quickly and without disorder. During the retreat, there were all kinds of traps and cover for each other, so that the losses of this group of troops could be said to be light. Duque did not retreat with the army. He followed the road that Azhara took to Grey Valley and entered the forest at high speed. He immediately noticed that Sylvanas was the first to come up to him. He almost thought that Queen Sylvanas was going to teach him a lesson like Turayan, but the next scene made him speechless. Queen Sylvanas entered, a very nonsensical acting mode. She gently covered her abdomen. My poor little Duke, who is rumored to be a posthumous child. Do you know? Your dad probably just lost his life because he went to the demons to show off, leaving us orphans and widows. Duke's facial muscles were almost out of control. Forget about pretending to be pitiful. What the hell was the legendary posthumous child? There were too many things to complain about, right? If Queen Sylvanas was not a cabbage that he had slept with, Duke would have wanted to kill her. Duque could only put his hands on his hips and said helplessly, "Well, if your man is a bureaucrat who only stays in the safety of the rear command post and gives orders to the frontline soldiers," Queen Sylvanas' face turned cold and immediately became cold. "Who is that guy? I don't know him." All right. Was this the right kind of dictatorship and personal heroism again? Duque said helplessly, "Well, I swear I won't do this next time." Queen Sylvanas leaned over and gave Duque a warm hug. Then she blinked her sly eyes and said solemnly, "No, what I want to say is, next time you do this, please be sure to take me with you." Chapter 923. That's enough, you guys. Stop messing around. Duque was so angry this time that his nose was crooked. However, this Queen Sylvanas was the Queen Sylvanas he was familiar with, an extremely courageous heroine. From another perspective, she was also an expert at courting death in fancy ways. As her man, Duque had come to kill the general and capture the flag. Queen Sylvanas was also itching to do something. Sigh, why can't Sylvanas learn from Sasha? Wouldn't it be great if she had the attributes of a good wife? Duque rubbed his forehead and warned Queen Sylvanas, "Don't play with fire. I might succeed the first time, but I'll definitely die the second time." "Of course I understand. I'll listen to you. This isn't Eversong Forest, anyway." Alright, Duque seemed to have found the crux of the matter. If this was the homeland that Sylvanas deeply loved, then no matter what, he would resist step by step and inflict the greatest amount of damage on the Burning Legion. At this moment, in the tribe's camp at the foot of the mountain, Grom was grinding his teeth. There was no first place in literature and no second place in martial arts. He had fought with Duque and Duque's subordinates for more than 10 years, and had even been saved by Duque. If Duque was still that despicable person who only knew how to hide in the army and play tricks, Grom obviously wouldn't care. Now that Duque had suddenly done something so exciting, Grom, the self-proclaimed #1 warrior of the tribe, really couldn't take it anymore. "That kind of thing I can also do." Grom was too old and Thrall couldn't control him. But Thrall used his wisdom to solve this matter. "Grom, do you mean you can kill that lich? Or do you mean you can run away like Duque after killing the lich?" After thinking about it for a moment, the mighty hell scream deflated. If it were him, he would have nothing to fear against Reki Winterfrost one-on-one. If he had to charge through the army at the front and kill a high-level lich, he wouldn't even have a 30% chance. Don't even think about coming back after you go. For example, a strength-type hero like him would always advance without retreat. Once he went up, he would either return with a complete victory or he would not be able to return. There was no third option. Of course, the images that Duque sent them couldn't be the slightest. It was like showing an old 640 to 480 resolution TV to outsiders, while showing your own family members the legendary 8K ultra-high-definition TV. The only thing the Horde and the Night Elves knew was that Duque had killed a Lich commander of the Burning Legion. In a sense, this was a form of protection for Duque, but it was also a form of flexing one's muscles. 2 hours later, Duque arrived at the tribal camp at the foot of the mountain. There was no welcoming or murderous hostility. Sal, Wajin and Grom just received Duque. "What is it?" asked Sal. "Nothing. I just have some information about the Burning Legion to share with you." With that said, Duque took out a bunch of figurines, or rather, monster models. The models were sculpted with hand of magic under the control of the system. This was the Azeroth version of 3D printing. Sal's pupils constricted in an instant, and his eyes were firmly attracted by the monsters that Duque took out. For example, This dog-like monster was covered in scarlet scales, with black barbs on its back and two huge white horns that looked like bull horns growing out of the front part of its neck. The edge of its hideous mouth, which looked a bit like a bird's beak, was full of sharp, jagged teeth. But when Sal reached out and touched the monster, a one projection that floated in midair and slowly rotated clockwise suddenly appeared. When the projection first appeared, all the orcs present were shocked. Brock almost drew his axe and was about to chop the monster. This is... Sal's attention was attracted by the orc language scroll below the projection of the monster, and he subconsciously read it out. Devil Hound, special skill, mana burn. Mainly for spellcasters such as shamans. Sal immediately realized what Duque had done. This was Duque sharing information with the tribe in the simplest and most straightforward way. Perhaps it could be considered that Duque was pretending, but no one could deny that without Duque's information, the warriors of the tribe would have had to pay with their lives to test it out. For ease of reading, it was also translated into orc language, and the key skills of certain demons were marked with red circles. Most orcs were illiterate, living in the wilderness for the first half of their lives. Coupled with more than a decade of imprisonment, few orcs understood orc language. Fortunately, Sal still had some shamans who were captured when Nizul attacked Azeroth. Otherwise, he really wouldn't have enough people to explain to the warriors. Simple text explanations weren't that straightforward, but with the 3D projection, as long as the orcs weren't too stupid, they would be able to remember what kind of enemy to deal with. For Duke to do this, it was really considerate of him. Sal very straightforwardly bowed to Duque. I thank you on behalf of the tribe. You are a true gentleman. Duque accepted Sal's bow calmly. When it comes to dealing with the Burning Legion, our interests are the same. Moreover, I can't get the most accurate information. This is only the general situation. Please adapt to the situation on the battlefield. We understand. As if remembering something, Sal asked again, how long does the tribe need to last? Duque cast a slightly melancholic gaze towards the top of the mountain. It depends on the night elves. But when the tribe needs to retreat, the alliance will cover you. Regarding this answer, Sal was both helpless and nervous. If they weren't forced into a corner, the tribe definitely wouldn't cooperate with the alliance. No orc would feel comfortable thinking that their escape route was in the hands of the alliance, their archenemy for more than a decade. Unfortunately, no one had a choice. The terrain of Mount Hyjal was very special. It was low in the west and high in the east, and the entire mountain path was S-shaped from west to east. Coupled with the super powerful array set up by the 3 dragon aspects, even the Archerons had to obediently go up the mountain from the west foot. Who asked him to be summoned to Azeroth, and his strength was halved. There was no battle that day, but not many orcs could sleep for the whole night. At the foot of the mountain, countless dazzling meteors cut through the night sky, whistling as they smashed into the Grey Valley area in the south. The Burning Legion was famous for their 3 light maniacs: steal everything, kill everything, and burn everything. Otherwise, why would so many races in the universe hate the Burning Legion? They had thought that the Burning Legion would take a shortcut from Azeroth, cross the precipice, and directly kill their way to the foot of Mount Hyjal. Otherwise, they would have to take a detour through Grey Valley and Fellwood Forest and obediently come from the front. Who would have thought that they guessed half right? Chapter 924. Every orc warrior was told that their mission this time was to save the world. Even though it sounded ridiculous, the orcs cherished this brand new territory after losing their homeland and being slaves for more than 10 years. Although it was barren, it was still much better than our world, which was shrinking every year and constantly rotting and collapsing. It was many times better than being a slave who had nothing. Upon hearing that the damned devils dared to encroach on their new territory, the orcs roared and swore to teach them a lesson. With the shaman's explanation and the magnified projection, they knew very well how powerful their enemies were and how huge their bodies were. They had also imagined that there would be an endless sea of corpses in front of them, or an army of demons with war banners covering the sky. But no one had imagined that the enemies would appear in such a situation. If the enemies didn't cross the mountain directly, they would take the normal route and pass through Mount Hygel's Grey Valley to the south before heading to Fellwood Forest to the west. Then, they would crash into the only entrance of Mount Hygel and the fortified camp that the orcs built over the past few days. The Burning Legion, who should have been enraged by the death of their frontline commander, didn't speed up or slow down. Instead, they reached Grey Valley at a speed of 150 kilometers per day. Even though the undead army had paid the price of marching day and night and far exceeded the limits of an ordinary army, it was still within the budget of the three main factions. Then, the Burning Legion ignored Fellwood Forest and arrived at the mountain pass of Mount Hygel. They relied on a gigantic monster that could make most of the defensive lines in this world a joke. Even from Duque's perspective as a transmigrator, this was an exaggerated and ridiculous matter. Under the image transmission of the mage's eyes, Duque saw a boss that shouldn't be here. While the tribe at the foot of the mountain was shocked by the sudden explosion, Duque had already sketched the outline of the gigantic monster with the system's assistance. Duque finally knew what Archimonde was doing in the boundless ocean. The orcs at the foot of the mountain camp were shocked by the landslide 3 kilometers away. Sar could only blankly shout, "Everyone be on guard." At that time, Duque decisively used the backdoor that the night elves had left for him to activate the teleportation according to the coordinates he had set in the orc camp. In less than 10 seconds, Duque's figure appeared in the middle of the tribe's campsite. Of course, Sal noticed the light of the portal. Almost as soon as Duque's figure appeared, Sal rushed over with his guards. "Marcus, do you know what that thing is?" "I know. A burrowing worm. Let's talk about the details later. Evacuate the center of the camp immediately. It doesn't matter even if the entire camp is evacuated." Duque shouted while waving his arms and legs. Sal's face darkened. Retreating before the battle even started was definitely an insult to the bravery of the beastmen. If it was someone else, he would have used the hammer of destruction to smash that guy's face into paste. But that was Duque, the brave Duke Marcus who had just risked his life to kill a commander of the Burning Legion the day before. Even the orcs who disliked Duque had to show respect for Duque's method of going deep into the enemy's midst and seizing the flag. Sal only hesitated for a second before blowing the horn that represented the retreat of the entire army. The order conveyed by the horn could not be completely carried out. Only the Warsong clan could carry out the order better. After more than 10 years of guerrilla life, they had thoroughly trained an elite and strong army. Slightly better was the Frostwolf clan. After all, it was Sal's father's clan. Sal had perfectly inherited the power of the old patriarch Durotan. Most of the other orcs from the other clans were slaves and seriously lacked discipline. It just so happened that this group of orcs was the most numerous. The orcs were in a mess, but the terrifying behemoth in the distance once again drilled into the ground and rushed towards the orc camp at a speed faster than a horse's gallop. It dug a hole in the ground like an earthworm. Every time it moved underground, it would cause the earth to bulge and shake. It was like a long-lasting earthquake that swept across the entire orc camp. Not many mortals could stand steadily in such a violent earthquake. From far to near, the ground bulged bit by bit. It was as if there was an invisible hand that could reach the heavens and the earth pushing a hill towards the tribe's camp. Closer, closer, closer. The tribal warriors had expressions of despair as they watched the moving hill with rocks tumbling outwards collide with the tribe's camp at high speed. In the next second, whether it was the Tauren warriors that weighed nearly a ton, the wooden walls made of huge logs that required 2 people to wrap their arms around them, or the tall arrow towers that were thick and sturdy, they were all knocked into the sky by this terrifying impact that was beyond the imagination of mortals. Not to mention the orc warriors that only weighed a mere 200 to 300 kilograms. From afar, those green orc warriors were no different from dolls. This was just the beginning. In the next moment, it was as if a long howl rose in everyone's heart. This sharp howl came from the dark underground world, from the distant ancient times, from the most ancient continent of Kalendor, which was still ruled by the 4 ancient gods and the elemental lords. The violent howl pierced straight into the deepest part of everyone's heart, evoking their most primitive instinctive fear. It directly made everyone forget to breathe and forget their heartbeat. Those with slightly weaker physiques and willpower directly fainted because their hearts were too nervous and suddenly contracted. At this moment, the center of the entire tribe's camp exploded. Like a volcanic eruption, countless sand directly exploded from the bottom to the top. Many unlucky people who had just been knocked flying had just begun to fall from the sky, but were once again knocked into the sky by the terrifying impact. And among this group of pitiful people, there was impressively the group of priests that Duque had specially provided for the orcs. Coincidentally, the young priest, Sally Maytwain, was also among them. As a priest, she had Holy Word, Shield, a rather practical life-saving skill that was not considered heaven-defying but rather practical. As a talented priest, the moment Sally was knocked flying, she cast a Holy Word, Shield on herself that was flickering with a faint white light. The milky white light shield resisted the flying rocks very well. She even cast a levitation on herself to avoid falling to her death from a high altitude. However, in the next moment, she fell into the deepest depths of fear and despair. Because below her, the tribe's camp that was originally filled with various defensive structures had disappeared. What replaced it was a huge mouth with at least 10,000 sharp fangs that stretched out from the deep black hole. She was slowly falling into the mouth that was enough to swallow a small town. Chapter 9:25. Not everyone was as capable as Sally, who could cast a levitation spell on herself to slow her descent. If there were any professions in the world of Azeroth that could survive a fall from such a great height, the priests would definitely be one of them. Of course, the mage's slow fall spell and the druid's instant bird transformation were also godly life-saving skills. Unfortunately, this life-saving skill seemed to be more of a death torture. Many of the unfortunate orcs, due to their weight and bad luck, were not sent flying too high or too far. In the end, they fell down early. The huge scarlet mouth that seemed to have come from the underground abyss easily swallowed them along with the sand and soil, making crunching sounds of chewing. The horrifying sound of flesh being crushed and cut made Sally and the others sink into the deepest and darkest fear. She kept shouting in her heart, "You're dead!" She kept shouting in her heart, "Holy light above, am I going to die? If I release the levitation spell, will it eat me like how it ate the orcs? Holy light, will Reynold come to save me? Or will Reynold be eaten too? Forget it. Sally doesn't want Reynold to save her. Reynold, run. Run as far as you can." Sally, who was slowly descending from the sky, was scared out of her wits. She bit her lower lip hard and stared at the horrifying, wriggling mouth below her. At that moment, she saw a scene that made her heart ache. She saw Reynold. Of course, the Alliance would not let a large group of priests come to the aid of the Horde. Instead, they sent a group of 800 swordsmen. Reynold volunteered to be a protector and joined the swordsmen. Reynold did not die in the first round of attack, but he was not much better off. When the huge worm rushed out of the ground, he was sent flying to the top of a 3-story Horde building. On the red umbrella-shaped roof that was commonly seen in Horde buildings, Reynold sat there like a fool. He did not do anything but watch as she slowly floated down and approached the opening and closing giant mouth of death step by step. "Reynold, save me." Sally was like a drowning person who found her last hope. She struggled to reach out her hand to Reynold. But it was too far. So close yet so far away. The huge mouth below Sally suddenly extended again, splitting into 4 parts. The bottom was bright red, and the terrifying mouth was full of sharp teeth. It started to bite towards the sky. With that huge mouth as the background, Sally's graceful figure in red and white seemed so weak and helpless. Beside Reynold was an elderly beastman warrior. He set an example for Reynold. He suddenly charged towards a young orc warrior who was descending from the sky. His powerful profession skills allowed him to do things that mortals could not. He crossed over a dozen meters in the void and knocked the young orc away with his shoulder, sending him flying out of the devouring range of the abyss maw and falling outside. No, the young orc who was suddenly saved burst into tears because he saw the old orc who saved him falling into the huge mouth with a smile on his face. It was only at this moment that Reynolds and Sally realized at the same time that they could do this. Charge was a basic skill of every warrior profession, and Reynolds knew it as well. As long as he found the right angle, Sally might be saved. There was not much time left for Reynolds. 3 seconds. At most, he had 3 seconds left. Even if he used charge, the two of them would die together. Sally Whitemane was in a dilemma. She hoped that Reynolds would save her, but at the same time, she did not want Reynolds to die for her. The melancholy of a young girl in puberty reached its peak at this moment. Unfortunately, some people were born with courage. Some people were born with wisdom. Some people were born with luck. However, Reynolds did not have any of these. He, who was born into a family of generals, realized in this terrifying moment that he was actually King Coward. Faced with his long-awaited childhood sweetheart, Sally, who was adopted by his father, in a desperate situation, he was so weak that he did not even dare to make a move to save her. His legs, which were supposed to be extremely powerful, seemed to be filled with lead, and he could not move at all. He wanted to use charge, but he suddenly realized that his body was leaning back, and his instincts were driving him away from that terrifying place. At this moment, time seemed to freeze. Sally understood the decision of her childhood friend. Her white hair fluttered as she fell, and she was surrounded by the horrifying giant mouth that was about to close. A pure and beautiful smile bloomed on Sally's face. She gave Reynolds her last blessing, truth word, toughness. This blessing could temporarily increase the HP of the target. Reynolds, you have to live. The girl's sincere smile was like a whip that lashed at Reynolds' soul. No. Reynolds retreated futilely as he stretched out his powerless right hand. He could only watch as Sally was swallowed by the giant mouth. Yes, half a second later, Sally Whitemane would have become history. A miracle had happened. At the very last moment, 2 shining white magic palms suddenly appeared and grabbed Sally. Before the giant mouth closed, Sally was dragged out of the hopeless situation where she should have been dead. Not only her, but there were also dozens of priests who had used levitation and were screaming in fear. They were also dragged out. Yes, it was very miraculous. No one would have thought that the old orc who had used charge to save the young orc and more than 10 orcs would also be pulled out. Every survivor was filled with great surprise. They turned their necks and looked for the saint who had saved their lives and souls at the last moment. They found him. Standing on the top of a tall tower, the Alliance's commander, Duke Marcus, held a staff in his left hand and a sword in his right. Around him, there were more magician hands, floating in the air, constantly saving the Horde soldiers and Alliance soldiers who had been affected. The young girl Sally's eyes couldn't help but be stunned. Duke didn't realize that he had just happened to save Sally Whitemane, one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, who was incomparably famous in history. He was feeling a headache for the boss that had appeared in front of him. System notification. The probability of the newcomer being the commander-level boss Auro is 97.22%. What was Auro? Perhaps even many veteran players before Duke transmigrated didn't know about this guy. But as a former elite team leader and the one who had held the Atish Guardian's legendary staff, Duke had participated in this guy's exploration in the game. It was a nightmare that he didn't want to recall. Chapter 9:26. There was Long Outyin on Earth. There was Aurora in Azeroth. Yes, it was referring to Auro, the crazy super-burrowing worm. The reason why he was called crazy was because he could be seen in any ranking of the most difficult bosses in Azeroth. Some of the rankings were first, some were third, and some were fourth. Anyway, his craziness had never dropped out of the top 5. Note that these were the rankings that were made from the time when Varian Rin was still a kid to the time when Varian's son, Anduin Varian, had grown up. It spanned across decades of Azeroth's history, and after looking at the bosses of the 7 major versions of the instance dungeons with a 3-digit number. Hence, after seeing Auro's iconic red carapace and scythe-like long legs, Duque felt a little annoyed. Damn it, I came to Azeroth to start a harem. Oh no, I came to save the world. I didn't ask you to open the hell difficulty so easily. Speaking of which, aren't you the younger brother of the ancient god Thun? The invasion of the Burning Legion has nothing to do with you 4 ancient gods. Burning Legion? If Azeroth explodes, will you 4 ancient gods still be able to survive? This time, Duque finally understood why the Archaerans would go against the course of history and stay in the Endless Ocean for so long just to negotiate with Thun. During the Dark Empire era when the ancient gods ran rampant, the 4 ancient gods and the Lord of Elements ruled the entire world. Before the Well of Eternity exploded, the entire southwest part of the old Kalimdor continent was Thun's territory. In ancient times, after the 4 ancient gods of Azeroth were sealed in a planet by the Titans, these 4 guys did not stay still. For example, N'Zoth would say, "You're a lowly," to Nesario 10,000 times every day, hypnotizing the silly black dragon to become his fighter. Another example was that, according to the course of history, Thun would jump out about 10 years later. Courage, who was in the south of Silithus, would jump out and seek death. Then he would be killed by 40 bandit-like heroes summoned by the Alliance and the Horde. Duke hated the disgusting insect that was Oro for running off to the wrong set. However, with the experience of Baron Geddon running out to scare people during the Battle of Blackrock Mountain, Duque was a little immune to this kind of scare. It was just that, after seeing the giant sandworm boss Auro in person, he felt that the proportions were too exaggerated. Oro's leg alone was at least 300 meters long. At first, he felt that Oro's mouth was too big, but when compared to his massive body, which had a diameter of 50 to 60 meters, he felt that only such a big mouth could match his body size. Originally, when the Burning Legion fought Mount Hyjal, Duque felt that the Burning Legion was breaking the rules. Now that Auro had entered the fray, Duque felt as if his opponent was an official cheat. Damn it, how was he supposed to fight? On the other side, the tribe had been tricked. Naturally, there were people who were unhappy. Gromhell roared and leapt high into the air, preparing to use Bloodhowl to deal a heavy blow to Oro. Then Lord Howl was amused. Oro was not just a simple giant sandworm. He had claws, and it seemed that Lord Howl's shocking roar and aura had finally alerted Oro. This giant worm with a crimson back popped out a claw that looked like a crab's claw. As one of Oro's 4 pairs of claws below his head, it was no different from a battering ram. The mighty Lord Howl was sent flying like a high fly ball in a home run. Whoosh! He flew out like a shooting star. The thick-skinned Lord Howl would definitely not die, but if his pride was damaged, Duque could not care less. Duque's face turned green. He immediately contacted the manager of Mount Hyjal through magic. "Hey, Tyrant, you see the situation at the foot of the mountain? If the Night Elves have any tricks up their sleeves, use them. If you leave this worm alone, you'll be able to smell Archimonde's bad breath on Mount Hyjal before noon. But we are accumulating our strength." Tyrant seemed to be in a difficult position in the magic mirror. Duque almost cursed it out loud. There are no buts. I know how strong Archimonde's subordinates are. Without this damned worm, as long as Archimonde does not come, I can help the Night Elves hold on for at least 3 days. With the worm, we can't even hold on for 3 hours. At this moment, Malfurion's bearded face appeared in the magic mirror. Plans cannot keep up with changes. Besides, we have been preparing for 10,000 years. It's not like we only have one move. Duke Marcus, can you swear to defend the mountainside for at least 24 hours with your life? Duque gritted his teeth. If Archimonde does not fight personally, I can. All right, the Night Elves believe you. With that, Malfurion cut off the communication. The next second, in the orc camp at the foot of the mountain, countless grass began to grow crazily. They all grew into green arrowheads the size of a human's arm, repeatedly shouting in orc language, "Danger! Danger! Please retreat quickly!" Not only them, but Duque also shouted in orc language with magic amplification. Retreat quickly. The night elves are going to use their ultimate move. Thrall's face was as black as the bottom of a pot. He had painstakingly organized a 1,000-man team in the midst of the chaos. On one hand, he needed someone to cover his retreat, and on the other hand, he wanted to defend his honor by attacking this ridiculously huge worm. Unexpectedly, both Duque and the night elves announced that they were going to use their ultimate move at the same time. Woken also advised, retreat. They had no choice but to retreat. Even if the orcs had lost unjustly, a defeat was a defeat. Thrall gritted his teeth, but he could only give the order, retreat. Oro was still wreaking havoc. The huge orc camp was like a toy made of building blocks, easily smashed by his claws and twisting body. Countless broken pieces of wood and orc limbs flew into the sky and scattered in all directions. Just as Oro's rampage reached its peak, the earth suddenly shook. The dong, from the initial blurry tremor, to a clear tremor a second later, to a sharp tremor 2 seconds later, no matter how large Oro's body was, even if he did not pay attention to his surroundings, he would still realize that something was wrong. The world tree Nordrassil itself was a symbol of life, and as the world tree that repaired the wounds of the world, it was even more blessed. Mount Hyjal had always been a place where plants flourished and life flourished endlessly. But at this moment, the surrounding greenery became even more exaggerated. The thick green was like the thickest haze, swirling around Oro's massive body. Bang! With a loud bang, a massive log that would require at least 5 people to wrap their arms around it broke out of the ground and slammed into Oro's massive body. Oro did not care. With a casual wave of his scythe-like claws, the giant log was split in half. In the giant insect's mind, this might be a spell of insignificant human beings, but it didn't care. It was wrong. Chapter 9:27. In the blink of an eye, 12 thicker and larger logs burst out of the ground, stabbing at Oro's twisting body. This time, Oro seemed to be a little annoyed. He suddenly spun his body, turning himself and the claws on his body into a brief whirlwind. With a 360-degree slash without any blind spots, his scythe-like claws chopped the 12 logs into pieces, sending them crashing to the ground. But this was not the end. Without giving Oro the time to catch his breath, the third wave of 36 logs and the fourth wave of 108 logs arrived almost at the same time. Oro twisted his huge insect body once more, turning himself into an insectoid version of a storm of blades, easily slicing apart the giant trees that had grown out of nowhere. At this time, his rationality had already begun to warn him. More logs appeared. A moment ago, the Beastman camp was still a flat plain, but now it had suddenly turned into a lush forest. And the entire forest was still expanding outward and inward at a speed visible to the naked eye. Not only were there more logs attacking Oro, this completely abnormal forest was also attacking him from another angle, underground. That's right. Oro had burrowed into the ground. At first, it didn't feel it, but soon it realized that its body, which was buried underground, was being strangled. Being able to burrow into the ground was an ultimate skill that he had relied on to save his life for thousands of years. Even a dragon aspect could not burrow into the ground like he did. It could be said that the ground was Oro's home field, and the ground was his proudest shield. The current situation had completely overturned his understanding. Countless powerful roots pierced deep into the ground. Not only did they grab hold of the soil, but they also quickly sealed off the tunnel that he had burrowed into. Oro had a feeling that if he wanted to go back the way he came, what awaited him would be death. He panicked. For the first time in his life, he was panicking when facing something other than his master, Thun. Almost instinctively, he moved his body, letting the parts of him that were buried deep in the ground dig out. 30 seconds later, Oro, who had never been seen in full by any mortal, finally revealed his entire body to the world. It was a 1,000-legged insect monster that was more than 1,000 meters long. On both sides of its body, there were almost countless neatly arranged legs that looked like crab claws. These slender legs were naturally not as big as the 4 pairs of large claws under the head. If each of these slender legs could still be active after being chopped off, they would definitely not be too bad if they were used as throwing poles for catapults. Just the sight of Auro's body was enough to scare trypophobia sufferers to death, and it was enough to make most people nauseous. However, since Auro dared to become a hired thug for the Burning Legion, there was naturally no reason to let him go. On both sides of the campsite at the foot of the mountain, there were many druids who looked very natural, with turf draped over their bodies. Zazasi, Nachonetazesai, they were like wooden stakes, standing on the mountainside, muttering druid incantations that outsiders could not understand. However, their entrance had a huge impact on the surrounding forest. It could be clearly seen that the giant tree was growing even faster and fiercer. If it had attacked at the speed of a tortoise at the start, it was really moving like a rabbit at this moment. The thick green fog greatly weakened Auro's senses. Just below his abdomen, where his senses could not reach, a giant tree that would take 6 people to wrap their arms around silently grew and stabbed towards Auro like lightning. This stab directly pierced through his abdomen and deeply into his innards. Then, the surging force of nature exploded, causing the tightly shut pores of this giant sandworm boss to suddenly open, and almost every bowl-sized hole began to spurt out yellow fluid. It was Auro's blood, as well as pieces of his innards. However, the reason why giant beasts were so difficult to deal with was because of their terrifyingly exuberant vitality. If a giant tree that would take 6 people to wrap their arms around pierced through its abdomen, even a giant dragon would die. However, for a giant sandworm that was 50 to 60 meters in diameter, this would at most be a light injury. The biological structure of an arthropod was completely different from that of a mammal. Just as more druids were preparing to do the same and stab Auro to death by stimulating the tree's rapid growth, this supergiant sandworm suddenly flipped on the ground. The sand and dust on the ground sped up and shot towards the druids on both sides of the mountain like cannonballs. Duque gasped, "Sandstorm explosion?" Duque was all too familiar with this move. This ruthless move centered around Auro had an attack range of 180 degrees. The worst part was that it would come with a 5-second-long stun. However, Auro just had to keep twisting and turning. If you were unlucky, you would be sent 4 sandstorm explosions in a row, knocking you out until you died. As the leaders, most of the druids were hit in an instant. As a result, the wild growth of the forest stopped by half. "Tyrant!" Duque shouted. "Got it." As expected, Tyrant appeared on a higher peak. She did not know how Duque knew about her ultimate move, but the night elves did not rely solely on druids to survive. The priestesses of the Moon Maiden Temple were also freaks who practiced both magic and martial arts. Dozens of priestesses dressed in beautiful moon-white robes appeared beside Tyrant, who was riding a white tiger. They raised their arms and used their unique magnetic voices to cast spells and praise the moon goddess, Ilun, whom they worshipped the most. The sky suddenly turned dark. From dawn, it suddenly turned into night. However, this kind of night was not evil darkness, but a quiet and serene night. The night sky was cloudless for thousands of miles. While Auro was distracted by the forest, a star deviated from its path. A rainbow-colored meteor streaked across the sky and crashed down. Without giving Auro any time to react, the meteor sped up again and again until it became a streak of light and crashed into Auro's head. At the last moment, Auro still instinctively tilted his head. The rainbow-colored meteor shattered one of his pincers, then pierced through the left side of his thick neck and came out from the back of his neck. Arg! Auro let out a heart-wrenching scream. Everyone could see the ghastly hole in his body. The shattered bones, internal organs, and blood all sprayed out with a bang, as if a torrential rain of blood had fallen from the sky. In that instant, everyone stopped what they were doing, be it the retreating beastmen and humans, or the night elves who were observing from the 2 sides of the mountain. Everything quietened down again. Everyone looked expectantly at the huge monster that had been pierced by the meteor. Chapter 9:28. Quickly die. The three major factions that had once been at odds with each other now shared the same sentiment, which was to hope that the big bug that had turned the base camp upside down would die quickly. Auro's appearance had rendered many people's plans useless. Duque had miscalculated the ancient gods. After all, the original location of the Endless Sea should have been the territory of one of the four ancient gods, Yashaji, during the era of the ancient Dark Empire. After the Well of Eternity blew up the ancient Kalimdor continent, the High Elves who had once served the Burning Legion occupied the deep sea on the surface. In reality, the area surrounded by the whirlpool in the middle of the Endless Sea was not just seawater. There were also sporadic islands. Obviously, there were the followers of the four ancient gods left there. Then, those people introduced the Burning Legion to the four ancient gods. Auro's appearance had caused the tribe's backup plan to fail. Taking one step forward and calculating 3 steps ahead was a necessary trait of a leader. Thrall letting the tribe join the temporary alliance was for the sake of the world. But on the other hand, this was also a great opportunity for the tribe to show off their muscles to the Night Elves. Everyone knew that if they killed a demigod, the Night Elves would definitely remember this grudge in their little black book. If the crisis of the world's destruction was resolved, then the territorial disputes around Grey Valley and the Barren Lands could be foreseen. But with Auro's arrival, the tribe's army had been devoured by 30% without even putting up a fight. How could Thrall not be angry? The Night Elves did not have it easy either. Whether it was the ultimate skill that the Druids had prepared like Descent of the Tree World, or Tyrants, Starfall, they both consumed a lot of magic power. They were definitely going to use it to fight the Burning Legion, but now it had been used up by a big bug. How could they not be angry? No wonder Tyrant had insisted that Duque make a promise and lead the alliance to hold the mountain for a little longer. Alright, Auro had to die. Even if he died a little slower, it would be a sin. With this in mind, everyone watched fervently as Auro fell, twitching in pain, struggling, and struggling. Wait. This guy, he's not dead yet? The gigantic worm that occupied almost everyone's field of vision did indeed look like it was twitching on the verge of death. Everyone tacitly did not surround it. Everyone knew that the struggle of a cornered beast was the most terrifying, and the dying prey was the prey that resisted the most fiercely. Soon, everyone realized that something was wrong. That's right, the meteor falling from the sky had pierced through Auro's body, and everyone could clearly see that even his spine had been completely broken. The life force of the arthropod boss, Auro, was beyond imagination. He was showing signs of self-healing. Countless tendon-like tentacles extended from the cross-section of his spine toward his head, attempting to reattach the broken spine that was still spewing yellow fluid. Every big shot of the Alliance, tribe, and Night Elves looked gloomy when they saw this. This was especially true for Tyrant, who was struggling internally. The Night Elves did have a trump card, but that was for dealing with Archimonde. If they used it here, they would have no trump card left for the Burning Legion's commander. As luck would have it, Auro seemed to have decided that Tyrant was the greatest threat to him. His 8 crab claws did not care about anything else as he forcefully dragged his slightly paralyzed lower body, making his 1,000-meter-long body charge straight for Tyrant at the top of the hill. High Priest, run! Tyrant's trusted aide Melland slapped the white tiger's rump. The white tiger immediately understood, and without waiting for Tyrant's orders, it immediately sprinted up the hill. Melland led more than 200 Moon Goddess Church sentinels in a counterattack against Auro, who was madly charging up the hill. Melland! No, Tyrant could not control herself as she was dragged away by the white tiger. She turned her head to look at her sisters who had followed her for more than 10,000 years. Although they were superior and subordinate, after 10,000 years together, they were already like sisters. Seeing that Melland and the others had chosen to die in order to protect her, Tyrant could not help but tear up uncontrollably. The arrows of the Night Elf archers and the attacks of the priestesses were not even enough to tickle such a huge bug boss. Only the giant trees summoned by the Druids could cause Auro some trouble. In fact, Auro did not slow down at all. Instead, he continued to speed up. What shocked everyone even more was that Auro seemed to have reconnected his spine. At first, it was only the front 8 claws that could exert force, but now, even the middle claws were beginning to move. No one knew if the huge wound on Auro's chest would completely heal, but it was clear that this astonishing monster was beginning to regain its freedom. At this critical moment, the arcane light of Flash suddenly appeared near the hole on the back of Auro's head. Duque, Tyrant, Thrall, Wajin and Grom, who had climbed up, were all shocked to see the highest commander of the Alliance standing on Auro's bumpy back. The next moment, 12 magicians' hands, the size of horse carriages, surrounded Duque and began to fire magic missiles the size of water tanks at Auro's huge wound from Starfall. The wound that was hit by the large arcane light balls began to spurt out large amounts of pus. Perhaps that was the acid in Auro's stomach. The yellow liquid splashed onto the hillside, instantly corroding large patches of green grass. A few druids who could not dodge in time were turned into a pool of pus and bones in the blink of an eye. They did not even have the time to scream. Everyone suddenly understood what Duque wanted to do. He was going to rush into Auro's body, which was like a sulfuric hell, with the body of a mortal, and find the opportunity to kill Auro. At some point, Jaina and Servanas arrived at the foot of the mountain. Seeing this, Jaina covered her mouth in horror, almost losing the ability to speak. Hundreds of meters away, Queen Sylvanas shouted, "Duque! Stop right there, you bastard!" As if he heard it, Duque tilted his head and smiled at Queen Sylvanas. "Sorry, it's too dirty here. Ladies are not allowed in." With that, Duque chose to step into the gates of hell. He activated all the barriers he could, his body burning with blazing flames, and rushed in. No! Servanas almost fainted. Duque would die if he did this. Chapter 929. Was he being reckless? Was he crazy? Perhaps it was. In many people's eyes, it was as if he had run into a grave and buried himself. This was simply courting death among courting death. The path of life was always filled with choices. No one knew what the consequences would be the moment they made a choice. Duque only knew that if he did not do it, no one else would, let alone do it better than him. Without the druids and tyrants' combined ultimate skill, if he wanted to kill Auro, he would have to break through the ultimate sandworm's defense, endure the damage from the sandstorm explosion and earthquake, and painstakingly wear down the ultimate sandworm boss. It would be a nightmare. He had just let Arthas escape not long ago, and no matter what, Duque would not let another boss escape. Letting a tiger return to the mountain had always been a great taboo. Letting a boss escape was the greatest blasphemy to Duque, who was a follower of the church who fought bosses and stole equipment. Duque was going to risk it all. The Breaking Dawn magic circuits in his body were already operating to the limit. Before charging into Auro's huge body with his staff in his left hand and his sword in his right, Duque filled every inch of his body with magical elements. Even he himself knew that he was likely to die. How long had it been since he had to resurrect his corpse? It had been so long that Duque had almost forgotten that he still believed in the Church of Brother Spring. But then again, could he still resurrect? He suddenly smiled bitterly. Before Duke charged in, his angular face and the faintly discernible bitter smile on his lips made Queen Sylvanas and Jaina burst into tears at the same time. This job, if Duque did not do it, no one else could. Everyone thought that Duque would be the one to stand up in the end, and even treated it as a matter of course. But who really thought about Duque's feelings? The two queens were trembling in shock. They were not the only ones. Every pair of eyes that witnessed this scene were filled with shock. Tyrant, who was riding on the white tiger, stopped. Thrall, Wutkin, and Grom, who were about to rush forward, stopped. Tens of thousands of mortals who were struggling, retreating, attacking, or trying to help Duque stopped. Every pair of eyes was watching as Duque's magic bombarded Auro's body. Yellow blood, flesh, and internal organs rained down on the grass. Then Duque crashed into it. It was a completely dark world. After Starfall, the sky returned to daylight, and not a single ray of light could penetrate the murky pus and flesh to shine into Auro's body. Duque was completely following the system elf's instructions as he pushed forward through Oro's body, which was larger than most factories. The violent rain of arcane cannons blew up the muscles and organs in the way. The blazing flames scorched like the sun, destroying everything in its path. Every time he took a step, the tip of his toes would extend forward in front of him, preventing Duque's feet from sinking too deeply into the stomach acid and muscle tissue. The outer layer was filled with violent arcane spells, the middle layer was filled with flames, and the inner layer was filled with ice. The perfect control of a Breaking Dawn mage made the impossible possible. Duque was like the most incisive worker in the world, digging a path of victory that belonged only to him in the body of a giant sandworm called Oro. The pain stimulated Oro. No matter how slow he was, he knew that an uninvited guest had barged into his body, enough to kill him. If Duque had entered through his mouth full of sharp teeth, he had a million ways to kill Duque. However, Duque had bypassed his mouth and entered through the back of the oral cavity, outside of the esophagus. He was at his wit's end, and could only twist his body in an attempt to prevent Duque from gaining a foothold. A giant sandworm over 1,000 meters in length could easily rise and fall more than 200 meters when it kept twisting and turning. For a mere human, it was 1,000 times, 10,000 times more violent than riding a roller coaster. There was almost no air inside, and Duque relied entirely on his wind and lightning powers to condense a ball of air to ensure that he could breathe. Under such violent tosses and falls, Duque had no choice but to expend even more mana, using Magus Hand and other spells to stabilize his body and continue moving forward. Oro's final struggle destroyed almost everything around him. The orc buildings he passed, the trees on the mountain, the grass. Even the rather sturdy rocks of Mount Hyjal were crushed into powder by Oro's frenzied struggle. Will Duque succeed? Jaina was extremely nervous, her right hand subconsciously gripping Servana's left hand. Queen Sylvanas' slender fingers and Jaina's as soft as spring onions clasped together, and they could feel the nervousness in each other's hearts. I don't know. Queen Sylvanas wanted to answer, but when the words came to her mouth, they became, he will definitely succeed. Because he is Duke Marcus. The greatest hero in the world. Because he is Duke Marcus. This sentence seemed to have become some kind of totem symbol, a faith filled with mysterious power. Jaina's heart, which was so nervous that it almost jumped out of her chest, seemed to have magically begun to calm down because of this sentence. Regardless of race, everyone was looking forward to it, waiting for the final result. According to the system elf's calculations, it was only 100 meters from Oro's wound to Oro's heart. But it was this 100 meters that made Duque feel as if he had walked a 25,000-mile-long march. Under Oro's frenzied twisting, even if Duque kept using the long icicles to stabilize his body, he still could not avoid being left behind. Moreover, the internal structure of Oro's body was completely different from what he had imagined. His stomach, which was filled with acid, was simply too big, and Duque had to choose to take a detour, passing through the stomach and the outer layer of the abdominal cavity. What was more terrifying was that Duque would occasionally encounter attacks from tissues similar to the human white blood cells that fought against external invasions. This consumed even more of Duque's mana. But nearer. Even if he took 5 steps forward and took 3 steps back, even if he took 10 steps forward and took 9 steps back, even if his progress was as slow as a snail, Duque was still nearing his target. Even without the system elf's guidance, Duque could hear the intense heartbeat coming from Oro's internal organs and muscles. "Die, monster," Duque roared, gathering all the mana in his magic circuit, and through the layers of internal organs, he shot a gigantic frostfire arrow at the target. Chapter 930. Oro's massive body was able to affect everyone's hearts with every move he made. His madness, his spasms, every building that it destroyed and every tree that it crushed was enough to make people tremble in fear. What everyone was most concerned about was, of course, Duque, who had entered Oro's body. It had nothing to do with race or faction. It was purely about Duque's success and the future of the entire world. This was the chain reaction of the ultimate move. If the Night Elves were forced to use their ultimate move here, then no matter how they struggled, they would not be able to escape the Burning Legion's clutches, and the world would be doomed. Just as everyone's heart rate reached its peak, Oro's mountainous body suddenly froze, and his fang-filled mouth opened wide. He seemed to want to roar, and let out the last howl of his life. But he couldn't do it. His blood-filled mouth opened wide, and then his neck tilted, and his head, which was as huge as a fortress, fell to the top of the hill. Dead? Really dead? Hooray! Regardless of race or camp, every mortal who was watching this scene cheered in ecstasy in their own language. Long live Lord Duke Marcus! The loudest cheers were naturally from the Alliance. At this moment, many of the Night Elves, who had isolated themselves for tens of thousands of years, heard of Duque's name for the first time. But that didn't stop them from giving their warmest applause to the human hero who had saved their high priest's life. Only the tribe's orcs were conflicted. What the hell was going on? 13 years ago, it was Duque who led the Alliance to single-handedly destroy the tribe's dream of conquering the world of Azeroth. It was also this man, who was more demonic than a demon, who single-handedly led the tragedy of sending hundreds of thousands of elite orcs into the sea to feed the fishes. But it was also this man who, in the face of a common enemy, did his best to save the tribe's warriors at the foot of the hill, and killed this seemingly undefeatable giant insect. The trolls and taurens were also very straightforward races. They had wanted to cheer and applaud, but the orcs were all silent, and they didn't know what to do. On the contrary, the first orc applauded. Looking for the applause, the orcs were shocked to find that the one applauding was their great chief, Sal. Sal shouted loudly, "Clap? Why aren't you clapping? In the face of a common enemy, whether or not he is our former foe. A hero who has performed such a heroic act deserves applause, doesn't he? Let us praise Duke Marcus." That's right. Heroes know no boundaries. Even if they were each other's heroes and each other's enemies, at this moment, he was still a common hero. Sal's magnanimity immediately received loud cheers from the orcs, trolls, and taurens. They were praising Duke's feat, but they were also praising Sal's magnanimity. Every warrior's face was flushed with excitement. Because only someone with such boldness and bearing is qualified to be our great chieftain. At this moment, something unexpected happened. "Duque, damn it. Are you dead? If you're not dead, make a sound." At some point, Sylvanas and Jaina were standing on Auro's huge body, looking as if they did not know where to start. At this moment, everyone was shocked to find that the hero who had finally killed Auro, Duque, had not come out yet. Sal's expression changed. He immediately slapped his forehead, picked up his hammer, and rushed toward Auro. If this was before the appearance of the Burning Legion, Sal would of course want nothing more than for Duque to die, the sooner the better. But the situation was different now. They were about to rely on the Alliance to carry the burden, and if Duque died now, the Alliance's camp could easily collapse. All of a sudden, the motionless Auro's body seemed to twitch. About 300 meters from his head, a small bump appeared on the left side of the worm's body, and then it quickly recovered. This movement was so small that even Jaina did not notice it. Sylvanas sensed it and shouted, "Duque is there. He's not dead yet. Quickly open an opening." Open. Easier said than done. Strictly speaking, Auro, this giant sandworm, was a demigod monster. With the enhancements from the leader template, his defense was insanely high. Ordinary attacks could not hurt him at all. Didn't you see how none of the druids had succeeded in activating the giant with stab? Jaina chanted an incantation, conjuring a giant ice sword and thrusting it forward. However, with a kacha, the seemingly sharp ice sword sank 3 meters deep into Auro's soft abdomen, but it did not manage to pierce through that thick layer of skin at all. Even Jaina could not do it, let alone Queen Sylvanas. The weakness of a ranger's low attack power was magnified at this moment. Queen Sylvanas and Jaina were so anxious that they were about to cry. Even Tyrant, who had rushed over on her tiger, could not do anything. At this moment, a sudden roar came from the sky. "Out of the way!" The girls looked up and saw a valiant figure rushing into the sky. He leaped high and then chopped down with the momentum of a comet. That crimson light was naturally blood roar. To be able to perform such a powerful jump slash, it had to be Grom Hellroar, the one who could teach the Lord of the Abyss, Manoroth, a lesson with his axe no matter how many times he had reincarnated. For a moment, Jaina thought that this terrifying orc was going to hit them while they were down. However, Queen Sylvanas reacted quickly and pulled Jaina away. Even so, the two girls were afraid that when Grom's axe cleaved through Auro, it would also cleave through Duque. With Hellroar's strength, it would not have been easy to break through Auro's defense. After all, this part of his body would usually be hidden underground. Firstly, Auro was already dead. Secondly, he was basically lying down and waiting to be slaughtered, so the power of Grom's axe was naturally raised to the limit. The axe actually made a cut that was even more exquisite than a scalpel's. Auro's white abdomen was cut open nearly 20 meters long, and muddy yellow blood and pus splattered out. Tyrant frowned and waved her hand. Elun's divine guardian. Immediately, a layer of gentle milky white light appeared on everyone's bodies. Obviously, this was to prevent the corrosive nature of Auro's blood. It seemed like the blood in Auro's abdomen was not that acidic, but it was still smelly. Queen Sylvanas and Jaina almost covered their noses as they watched Sar and the Minotaur chief Cairn Bloodhoof rush forward and tear at the wound even more. After the toughest outer layer was torn open, the rest was simple. Grom rushed forward and hacked at Duque's ice barrier in 3 to 5 strikes. Chapter 931. Duque, who had been dragged out by everyone, had a funny expression on his face. It was a strange expression that said, "There's always an unruly person who wants to harm me." For a moment, Grom almost wanted to break the ice and chop Duque's head. Fortunately, activating the ice barrier did not mean that Duque lost his perception of the outside world. On the contrary, Duque's senses were even sharper. Opening the fridge in advance was just a precaution. If Hellscream was so weak that his hand trembled and killed Duque, Duque would definitely think of a way to send the supposedly dead Grom back to hell to play in the mud after reviving. However, Duque had gone all out this time. The magic circuit was empty. If his magic circuit was usually a huge reservoir, then it was now a small pond where the bottom could be seen. Although the Breaking Dawn magic circuit could continuously generate magic power for Duque, he had used too much just now. Even if the internal organs of a demigod monster were as strong as demigods, it was really difficult to break through. After Duque deactivated the ice barrier, his legs suddenly turned to jelly, and he fell forward. It didn't matter if he fell, but he still had his two confidants by his side. Even if Gianna was unwilling, at least my baby Sylvanas was here. That was what Duque thought. Yes, the plan worked. So, Duque fell with relief. In fact, Queen Sylvanas had indeed stretched out her hand at lightning speed to help Duque. However, the stench coming from Duque's body easily repelled Queen Sylvanas. She retracted her hand as if she had been electrocuted. In less than a second, Duque was about to fall miserably into the mud. At that moment, the tribe's elder was dumbfounded. They were not even professional at saving people, let alone something as weak as helping someone up. Not to mention, weren't those two women extremely nervous just now? No one realized that most beautiful women were actually misophobic. The more beautiful a girl was, the more they paid attention to their appearance. Were there sloppy beauties in this world? It must be a magical existence that looked like a beautiful woman, a beautiful tomboy. And so, without a care for anyone, Duque fell straight and miserably into the abyss of mud. Until the moment before he fell, Duque still raised his head and showed a sad expression to the two queens. Fortunately, in the end, Queen Sylvie put on an expression that said, "Since you've already ruined me, I might as well let you ruin me once and for all," while she reached out to hold Duque's right arm. His left arm was in Proudmoore's hand. At this moment, even a fool would know that the two queens had a close relationship with Duque. Jaina immediately summoned a water elemental and swallowed Duque's large body into it. Only his head was left outside so that she could clean Duque's body. Under Jaina's superb control, Duque felt like he was soaking in a hot spring jacuzzi. After being treated like an emperor, Duque finally felt comfortable. He suppressed the urge to divorce Queen Sylvie. Duque sighed. "Grom, it's your turn to save my life. Or even now." Lord Howell's mouth twitched. "That counts?" "That doesn't count." Duque bared his teeth. "Fine, I'll count it as half a life." Grom didn't say anything else in the end. His silence indicated his agreement. Duque turned to Thrall. "Please order a speedy retreat. Even the seriously injured must be treated immediately and moved to the camp halfway up the mountain for treatment." "So soon?" Thrall was stunned. Thrall's original plan was for the tribe to immediately reorganize the defense line. They would stand up where they fell. Retreating without a fight was not the tribe's style. Duque looked at the mountains to the south. "I'm afraid that the cave that the giant sandworm called Oro came out of will be used." "Used? Then could he make use of it?" Thrall frowned slightly, then proposed this idea, as well as his wish for the orcs in good condition to join the defense line on the mountainside. He also expressed his determination to obey orders. It was obvious that Duque's repeated acts of generosity had influenced the entire tribe. "All right, I might have to be depressed for a while. I'll leave the rest to you and to Rayan to discuss. Remember, it's best that we hold on for more than 3 days. It won't be good for either side to lose too much, so please make sure to rotate." "Understood." Thrall nodded heavily. History had changed greatly. Originally, it should have been the camp at the foot of the mountain and the camp on the mountainside that would each take on the Burning Legion for 2 rounds. Now, it was obvious that the Alliance camp on the mountainside would take on 4 rounds. When they arrived at the camp on the mountainside, the tribe was dumbfounded by the exaggerated fortress in front of them. It was infuriating to compare oneself to others. When comparing goods, they had to throw them away. Everyone had entered Mount Hyjal at the same time, and the tribe had the geographical advantage. They didn't even need to transport things up the mountain. At that time, when they saw the Alliance's large steam trucks carrying bags of the legendary city-building artifact, cement, up the mountain, the young orcs, including Thrall, were full of curiosity. When the Alliance mixed cement and steel to form this towering concrete city standing in front of them, Thrall finally understood why his predecessors had suffered such heavy losses after crashing into the humans' military fortifications. There were a total of 7 walls built against the mountain, and each wall could accommodate a carriage. This was not a wall built with bricks and stones. The 7th wall, which had not yet been fully formed, clearly told the tribe that the wall was built with a huge steel net as the base, and a huge template was covered on the outside. Then, in the gap between the 2 layers of template, the magical slurry of cement was poured. Each wall was also divided into 2 layers of outer walls and the thickest inner wall. The outermost layer was also a reinforced concrete structure, purely to resist physical attacks. The middle layer could not be seen, but this could ensure that the damage and collapse of the outer wall would not affect the structure of the inner wall, which in turn would affect its load-bearing capacity. The outermost 3 layers of the wall had been completed, and the orcs could also see that on the middle 3 layers of the wall, the mages, who were suspended in the air by baskets, were engraving magic runes on the middle layer of the wall to strengthen its ability to resist dark magic. Thrall and the others were completely shocked. The camp at the foot of the mountain that they had painstakingly built felt inferior to even a human town. In his heart, Thrall was even more determined that he could not say it out loud. After Thrall and Turayan discussed cooperation and the distribution of supplies and other issues, Duque was taken to the most heavily guarded room in the fortress to recuperate. "Rest well, we have something to do, so we'll leave first." Queen Sylvie and Jaina were also busy people, and they were about to prepare for war. Duque suddenly said, "Wait. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.